live on YouTube. Live on Odyssey.
Nice. Oh wow, yeah, there's okay. I really like the episode description. It's really good.
I took from some of your email.
It's great. Great track.
Did a lot with very little.
Indeed.
I think the full song's like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean,
This is a 12-minute arrangement.
Yeah, it's an excellent.
Feels like something out of Gladiator.
Right, or Dvorak.
And there's no real orchestra. It's all with samples.
It's all sampling, yeah. But these sophisticated composition programs these days are pretty awesome. I still have yet to get the real hang of it, but I'm a big fan of these kind of arrangements because it just raises the bar of excellence on these little tidbit melodies that we've heard growing up. And this is just...
What's cool about chip tunes, which is what they call the originals, they had to be very catchy because they were so limited in the hardware and the sounds they could produce. So it's kind of like the invention is the mother of necessity.
Right. But I mean, yeah, you can go back to these old school, 8, 16-bit games, and all you gotta do is play an incredible arrangement like this, and it's got every bit the replay value.
And you could repackage and sell it for more than you did in 1986.
Absolutely.
Which Nintendo's actually pretty good about doing.
Yeah. It's true.
Are you ready to start?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's fade this down.
You're listening to the Zetetic Newscast on the Zetetic News Network with your hosts, Dave, and Xavier Diamant. Proceed by inquiry.
All right, welcome to episode 37 of the Zetetic Newscast. We are your hosts, Xavier Diamant and myself, Dave. And we thank you guys for tuning in for this very special episode. It's August 15th, and if you haven't already figured out from the thumbnail, we're going to be hosting a special guest today, Adam Green from No More News. And we're very excited to have him on. He hasn't called in yet, but Adam, if you're listening, you just got to call the number on the screen, 1-855-877-5112. And that goes for anybody listening out there as well. If you want to call in and sit there in the queue, you can listen to the show while you're doing so. We're also streaming on YouTube, Theta.tv, Rumble, and Odyssey, simulcasting. Hopefully we don't run into any technical issues, but you can tune in there, drop us a message in the live chat, and we might make you part of the show. It depends on how this all goes. Before we welcome our guest and sort of kick off the discussion with Adam, there are a few housekeeping updates that I'd like to make you guys aware of. First of all, we added Adam to the list of live channels on our homepage, zetetic.news. So as you can see on the screen, if you're watching, we've got different content creators, and we're trying to expand beyond the YouTube realm because for obvious reasons. So I've been working on trying to figure out how do I embed like Odyssey links or Rumble links. And I thought, keeping with our message of proceeding by inquiry, and seeking the truth, we would add Adam to that list of content creator sources that you can find easily on our homepage as, what we think is the first next generation news network on the Theta network, but powered by the Theta blockchain. So, and I also thought it was fitting, hopefully Adam's listening right now, to put him right there next to his buddy Alex Jones. Of course, I'm joking. But yeah, that's the whole Fox News thing, fair and balanced, right? You got both sides, the Zionist-controlled opposition, and the person probably most responsible for bringing awareness to that concept, at least in the internet sphere. So, always be looking, checking back. I also made various updates to, like, I paid for a bigger license for this piece of software that helps us aggregate RSS feeds, and I was limited to like 25 originally, but now I've got like unlimited. So I've always wanted to like go in and add content to, like, say, the geopolitics, which is a very broad subject. So I've gone in here and added additional RSS feeds, and I'll be adding YouTube channels, and I'll probably be even dividing these menus up as well as things become more complicated and we need to be more specific with the labeling. Also added a do-it-yourself tab. I just feel like, if we're going to talk about solutions, we should include content that's not necessarily politics-based per se, but might be common sense, do-it-yourself type of material. Because I think that's one of our key messages is autonomy, autarky, self-actualization, and building skill sets rather than just trying to collect money. And so I've put in here, this is sort of like a submenu, planes, trains, and automobiles. I've got information about how to fix your car, different tool performance, what's the right tool to buy for the job, modern homesteading, and survivalism. So if you're not familiar with Zetetic.news, and I certainly appreciate some of you tuning in may have never heard of us before, check us out at Zetetic.news, where, we talk about pretty much every subject under the sun, but most specifically the ones that are the subject of the most censorship. We kind of knew when we launched this thing that the topics that the powers that be want to prevent you from hearing are probably the ones, most worth talking about. And in the description for today's episode, I mentioned that Adam is sort of like a brother in arms in that sense. He's been, let's say, he's even a brother in arms with Alex Jones to an extent, taking the Alex Jones mold and just applying it to Adam, right? And just banning him out of hand. I mean, they're doing this to really low-level content creators, people that aren't even necessarily really getting political. A lot of crypto people have just been out of hand, banished off of YouTube. So, like, why is that? If their ideas suck so bad, why do you have to manually get rid of them? So, I think Adam is he's got a good home here, from that vantage point. And obviously we don't have any YouTube content of his because there is none. And I was trying to find like a bio maybe we could read to introduce our guest, but if you just Google him and try to find a biography of any sort or some summary that's fair to his work, it's virtually impossible. It's all defamatory, and not even really using quotations. It's often just pejoratives and generalizations about him.
Hasty dismissals, unsubstantiated investigation, just the typical sort of ignoramus treatment of the subject that, he has quite a bit of depth in unraveling. I'm a religious studies guy. That's what I looked at in college, and I have always kind of had an interest in religion. I'm also a preacher's kid, went to church all the time, and really started to kind of question some of the underpinnings of the efficacy, the historical truth, the development of the dogma and the doctrine, and really the sort of roots of Christianity. And it led me to this inexorable conclusion that it really is a derivative formation of this Abrahamic sort of desert cult identitarian ethos that is really based on mystical covenant magic, and to a great extent, Christianity and Islam are popularizations of this anthropomorphization of so-called God's will, right? And each one of these religions is seeks to hypostatize that will in various dogmas and doctrines, and appeals to authority, appeals to history, appeals to revelation. And upon continued scrutiny, and there's always more to learn, there's always more things to discover, of course, but I'm kind of coming to the realization that in some aspects of Christianity really go back to early formations within the Old Testament, and really even into other cultures as too, including Zoroastrianism and many of the Hittite, Canaanite mystery religions that proliferated and syncretically blended with Greek and eventually Roman deities. And so I think that there's a real case to be made for a kind of trans-historical mythicist view of these various religions, and how they've come to really predominate our sense of what constitutes valid historical evidence and what is directly referenceable as so-called truth. And I think that, here at ZNN, we kind of proceed by inquiry using the Perot method of zetesis, trying to find a balanced equilibrium based on ataraxia, which is a Greek principle of sort of shared understanding through multi-perspectival inquiry. And
it's also recognizing things as they are.
Right.
Sort of breaking it down to what is self-evident or axiomatic.
Mm-hmm.
But also the method of investigation is to proceed by inquiry rather than presumption, which is often how a lot of news articles are written today. They have a predefined destination, and then they're given a story, and then they twist the story to reach that destination.
Absolutely.
That is not proceeding by inquiry. That's writing your own answers. But
right, seeking to verify or prove the very thing you believe in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of begging the question.
Yeah.
And indeed, that is replete, and it's pervasive in so many fields, and we're definitely going to get into that today, and how deep this, as William James put it, the will to believe really is. And I think it goes extremely deep through antiquity and into the really so-called unknown past of civilizations that is also very much becoming open for debate these days. Archaeological, architectural investigations into the official explanation of things
Mm-hmm.
are really being eviscerated today.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of kind of neo-skeptical emphasis on looking at the construction of narratives over time to build a reality principle, to build a worldview or a Weltanschauung that seeks to lift up a lot of the times a pre-existing doctrine, pre-existing dogma about what constitutes reality or truth. And so I think that within the theological sphere, you have this sort of transcendental appeal to perpetual authority in the form of a super conscious entity that sort of watches over and knows everything that's going to happen, but seeks to let us as mere mortals sort of figure things out and to eventually come to the proper ritualistic orientation for things that we want to occur. And that's really...
Well, that's another
yeah.
big subject of overlap that we
Right.
have with Adam, I think, is the subject of eschatology.
Yeah.
And how, in a sense, almost everybody has one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having one isn't necessarily bad, but there are certain people who harbor certain eschatologies that have to do with apocalypse. And so why shouldn't we study that and try to understand what it is they believe, and whether, obviously, if it is true, wouldn't we want to know about that? But if it's not true and it's a fabrication, why is it a fabrication? And with that, I think Adam is called in. I'm hoping this is him, 760 area code. I'm going to press the talk button, and we'll do a quick sound check to make sure this is Adam before we proceed by inquiry into this theological and pseudoscientific discussion, because I think, Xavier, you really spearheaded bringing Adam on because of all this overlap in the subjects of interest.
Yes.
So I'll be playing more of a Jamie role, Jamie from the Joe Rogan podcast, where we've got some different source clips. I know you have probably some questions and other things you'd like to discuss with Adam. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And let's do that sound check real quick. Adam, hopefully that's you on the line. If you don't mind saying hello, and if you could just introduce yourself for maybe some viewers, listeners that aren't familiar with your work. I was going to read a bio for you, but anything you find on Google is obviously just a defamatory, rag in my findings. But Adam, are you there?
I am here. What's up, guys? Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for calling in. We're trying to get your volume boosted here for a second.
Yeah. Another sound check there.
I was enjoying listening to you guys the last 17 minutes here.
Oh, great.
And look forward to the chats. And I am Adam Green. I go by No More News online. I've been making videos with my main focus being just the general topic of Zionism. And I started my No More News back in 2014, so going on 8 years of making videos online, hundreds of videos. I've been censored. I grew my channel up to 135,000 subscribers, and that was banned by YouTube a couple years ago. I was also banned with a page on Facebook with about almost 8,000 followers there, banned there. Because they pass laws that you cannot talk about, quote, conspiracies. This is what the critics usually call me, an anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist.
Right.
And all I do is study what the rabbis say, read what their holy texts say, read what the Talmud and Kabbalah and Zohar all say, show clips of rabbis, and then they call me a conspiracy theorist. But that about sums up what I've been doing. I'm focusing on Christianity and Islam as a way to impose Judaism on all of the nations of the world, with getting them, which fulfills the prophecies of worshiping the God of Israel. So that's been really my main focus recently, and hopefully we can chat a whole lot more about that.
Awesome. Well, you definitely brought up the fact that these sort of online representations and this label of anti-Semitism. We recently, through kind of combing over YouTube, we found that interview, a really sort of a discussion / debate with what's his name?
Adar
Weinrib. And
oh, that's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a good one for you guys to watch.
Definitely, it was highly instructive, if only to expose the sort of highly repetitious and redundant sort of Hasbara script that was being exacted against points that you seemingly had to really spell out in all, as meticulous and
You were very patient.
very patient.
Yeah, the main straw man that he was using and that they always throw is you're blaming all Jews, which I've always clearly, explicitly said that's not the case. And in reality, I consider the vast majority of Jewish people that follow Judaism as, and even that don't follow Judaism, as victims of this whole Torah, Yahweh, Abrahamic conspiracy. They're deceived just like the Christians and the Muslims.
So you actually care for them. You're trying to provide a service to them.
Well, absolutely. I feel like, in my view, I'm exposing an evil book of a ancient Judeo-Christian temple cult that has prophecies about destroying the world, ruling the world. The chosen people and the not chosen people. And other people say other you obsess over this. This is a religion and paradigm. The Abrahamic paradigm has been dominating history for the last 2,000 years. I mean, to even say the last 2,000 years, we're in the year 2000 basically, because they changed the date to match when the Savior was born. That's how much influence this has dominated. So, when I criticize Zionism is basically just, in my opinion, Judaism and Christianity. And anybody that believes in the prophecies of Zion and the Torah, I believe that all Christians are de facto Zionists, because to believe in Jesus and be a Christian, you have to believe in the prophecies of Zion in the Old Testament. That's where God dwells. The law must come forth from Zion. So this whole term, anti-Christian Zionist, I think it's a misnomer and an oxymoron, basically, because they still want the Moshiach ben David, the Jewish Messiah, to come back and rule the whole world. Every tongue will confess, every knee will bow. This is and then they say it's a conspiracy theory to talk about them ruling the world, when this is what all of their prophecies that they fetishize and fantasize about happening.
Yeah, just a personal anecdote, Adam. I haven't done nearly the depth of research that you or Xavier have done on this subject, but just in my own life, I have witnessed this influence unquestionably, first with my Irish Catholic grandmother, who is professes to be very Catholic, but I found out she believes in this whole idea of a chosen people and a chosen land, of course that being Israel. And then a second experience was I was doing some campaigning for Ron Paul, thinking I might be able to garner some kind of influence in the local GOP politics. And I showed up to an organizing meeting at someone's house and had a 9/11 was an inside job bumper sticker. And I was immediately kind of fingered by what I later learned was both the secretary and the treasurer of the local GOP. And she was admittedly, she basically told me the only reason she was, quote, a Republican was because she felt Mitt Romney was going to do more for Israel than his opponent. And of course, she hated the insinuation that 9/11 was an inside job, even though I didn't say anything about Israel at that point, although maybe I could or should have.
Indeed. Well, and I goes just
yeah, that's back. Interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, going back to that interview, another thing that Weinrib kept constantly talking about was, it's such a small percentage that believe this. It's well, all you need is a handful or maybe one family dynasty that has incredible amount of wealth and influence to believe these things to render that point completely moot. And then we've seen so many examples in history where, for example, the Rothschild family was declared as...
Well, they blame so much on Hitler. He's one man.
Well, sure.
That's a tiny percentage of the overall population, but did that stop him from getting... and of course, we could talk about...
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack, but that the implication behind that is, I would say, fallacious, because you're reducing a highly complex, kind of inherently oligarchical phenomena as reducible to mere numbers, as if a numeric comparison to the broader population has anything to do with the threat that's upheld within halls of power. And I just think that's such a red herring distraction from the actual argument, which is, broadcasting a belief system that has threatening kind of apocalyptic genocidal elements built into it, and it doesn't really matter if it was in the past or that people only see it as a belief pattern that was in a historical context of these ancient tribes. The fact that it still survives today, and you have adherents to it, who, again, all you have to do is look at Adelson and his influence within the Republican Party. That's one guy. So you want to talk about low percentage points with, disproportionate amount of influence. The number doesn't really matter. It's the fact that it's still in existence and believed by prominent figures, however few figures those, might be seen or compared to in terms of the broader population. He just kept repeating that. And I was like, I got to the point where an hour and a half.
Stop listening.
Of the way through, I was like, dude, do you not understand that this is an elitist phenomena, this particular ideology, that of course it's going to be a small group of people that are upholding this fringe view because they can operate with impunity due to their wealth and influence? I couldn't believe that was just it was like him.
Obtuse Academy.
So exactly, the Obtuse Academy. And it was just, that was like a little insight into
the challenge you have, Adam.
The challenge you have essentially is trying to unpack the erroneous assumption that large numbers indicate low probability in the implementation of potentially threatening and dangerous belief systems.
And it's not even true that it's only small numbers. The problem isn't the interpretation, it's the text in general. The Torah is incredibly supremacist, just reading it in normal, regular understanding and context. And it's not just, I've heard, rabbis say oh, we're such a small percentage of the world. Who cares that we think that we're chosen? Who cares about that? There's barely any of us. But you got to understand that the Christian world also affirms their fake myths in their holy texts, and they believe that they're chosen by God in Zion and Jerusalem as the Holy Land, and they're worshiping the Torah Messiah of in Jesus, and so that they're upholding all these things. It's almost like they're quasi-Jewish. Christianity is a Jewish sect, and look at the influence that it has. You see, I was raised in a Christian family as well, and my family believes that they're chosen by God and worships the God of Israel, and believes in this deceptive Messiah construct that they created to go to the Gentiles. Where it says in Isaiah that the Gentiles will put on him their hope. In the Gentiles, they will hope for the Messiah. So it was the plan all along for them to go to the Gentiles and to have this supposed rejection, and then there'll be some sort of a reconciliation or a rectification at the end. And just the influence on our culture, though. You drive around, there's huge churches on every corner, the center of every small town. You go out in public, you see people wearing crucifixes around their necks and tattoos of Jesus and crosses everywhere. And this is all a symbol of ancient, barbaric, blood ritual, scapegoat, atonement, sacrifice, based upon Yom Kippur with blood magic and burnt atonement offerings to God. So it's really influenced all of Western culture through Christianity. So you can't underestimate the influence that the Torah conspiracy has had on the world.
That's a good point, because honestly, what you could characterize Christianity and Islam as sort of proto-Noahidic developments within the Western world.
Absolutely.
That they're essentially precursors to this Hephaestian desire to mold and shape beliefs over time into a all-encompassing worldview that seeks to ingratiate and instantiate all of the various beliefs within this Abrahamic tradition, while simultaneously dovetailing it with the so-called progress of the ages, using science and technology as this kind of fruit to be ripened, as it were, in the future, so that everything can sort of fall under its sway. And you get sort of references to that with the whole treading of the winepress, and that ultimately in the Kabbalah, the husks or the shells or the kelly pot is seen as almost like a peel, like the real fruit and the juice, as it were, within the soul is not ripe yet, so to speak, and that ultimately in the world to come, really there's an attempt to reunify philosophy, science, and religious understandings back together like they were. They were honestly an integrated discipline for more than 1,000 years prior to Christ. That really the hieratic rites and the ancient mystery schools saw the pursuit of knowledge, which you could see today as scientific understanding, necessarily dovetailed in with theurgic desires to become immortal, and that's where you get sort of the philosopher's stone, the desire for immortality, and then that's fused in with this kind of mystical passion, as it were, towards the divine, and that perhaps we've lost to history many unique synthetic traditions and combinations of these three things. And what we've got today is really a hyper bifurcated, a schizophrenic sort of inchoate understanding of how these things actually blend together ultimately. And I think with the whole rise of the so-called New Age, there are many streams within the New Age that seek to integrate specifically Zoharic and Kabbalistic thought forms into the broader movement towards technological sophistication and so-called knowledge of the universe. And so that's kind of where I wanted to dovetail in some of the clips and some of the topics along those lines into this framework that you've developed, which is really the discovery and the disclosure of this hegemonic hubris that is being upheld as sort of the height of wisdom within the West today, and that's highly problematic because the vast populations of the West are seen as essentially casualties on the way towards this ripening fruit of the technological future and this sort of divine technocracy, you might say, that they want to roll out. And you're absolutely right that the vast preponderance, I mean, perhaps 99.9% of people who can be designated as Jewish have no idea the depth of this subversion, and that has included them, which they're taught again from a very early age that they have to sort of embark upon and internalize this identitarian struggle with this this apparently xenophobic world that sees them as the problem with everything, and so that's why they have to defend themselves in all of these convoluted and highly organized ways. And so that I think that really kind of shows the extent to which the pseudoscience and theological subversions are in many ways kind of different paths or different aspects on the same mountain of control or predominance. And I'm just wondering how if you've had any, and I know you've covered a lot of the rise of the technocracy and Israel's role in that, but I'm wondering if you're familiar with some of the even pre-Enlightenment or pre-scientific revolution influence of Kabbalistic thinking on the so-called founders of modern science.
Absolutely. You guys are really spot on, man. I'm enjoying listening to you guys. Finally, somebody gets it. You mentioned the tech in Kabbalah. Like, that's something I've covered in depth and to talk about all the time. There's a book about the genius of Vilna, the Gaon of Vilna, from the top Kabbalah rabbi from the 1700s. And he has commentary on a verse in the Zohar. And it is, I just read it out real quick. In the 600th year of the 6th millennium, that's the year 1840, the gates of wisdom above, which is Kabbalah, together with the well springs of wisdom below, which is science, will be opened up, and the world will prepare to usher in the 7th millennium. This is symbolized by a man who begins preparations for ushering in the Sabbath on the afternoon of the 6th day. And they believe the 7th millennium, the Shabbos millennium, will be after the 6 days of creation. And, not just that we're in the year 2022, since in the day of our Lord, because they changed the dates, the dating, but also we have the 7-day week also, which is a biblical concept. But so absolutely, they're about using Kabbalah and science together to usher in their end times. And when the end times requires major wars with mass death and plagues and famines and total mark of the beast control over the whole world, with as prophesized from Israel and Jerusalem, with tech, cybersecurity, supremacy, and also, yes, the history of science in Kabbalah, and also Kabbalah in Freemasonry, and Kabbalah influencing other top scientists, sometimes that were commissioned by the Vatican, which was also had Christian Kabbalists involved in influencing them. And you see even today the top astrophysicists and scientists on television promoted by mainstream media, they try to credit Kabbalah and say, oh, Kabbalah predicted all these things that we're seeing in astrotheology, like black holes and the Big Bang, and totally trying to credit Kabbalah like it's some type of like supernatural special wisdom. And yes, it has always dominated the New Age movement, and they're all about the New Age, the Messianic age, where both Jacob will inherit both the heavens above and the world below from Esau, which they consider the Gentiles or Christianity. And yes, Christianity and Islam are Noahide precursor religions. All the top rabbis have always said that throughout history. Even the foundation documents show that this is what this was about. They were bringing in, they wanted the whole world to worship the God of Israel and get rid of all competition, which is the pagan idol worship, the religions and cultures and myths of all people, all the nations of the world. And they eradicated that and replaced it with worship of their God. This is a theological conquering and subjugation of the world. They're about having the Gentiles be fearful and obedient and submissive and slaves to the God of their holy book that chose them.
But if they pay you a salary, Adam, it's okay, right?
Right. It's like, that's
no, it's a great grift and mind control trick. Absolutely.
Well, that's a good segue into some of these clips that we've got pulled up here on the episode. And honestly, I'm glad that you see that connection between the rise of science and the preponderance, and the preponderance of Kabbalah within the
like that verse said too. The verse said that was 1840, like the start of like the Industrial Revolution, basically. And also, some claim that the Renaissance was promoted by Kabbalah. They have a tendency to take credit for a lot of things, though, when it's not exactly true. So take that all with a grain of salt a little bit. But that's the narrative that they're perpetuating.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I've even excavated the influence of Maimonidean Kabbalism on the founder, really, of the whole Christian Kabbalah tradition, which is Pico di Mirandola. He was taught Hebrew and really gained a lot of his admiration for the Kabbalah from the Kabbalist Elijah del Mendigo. And so even at the very start of the Renaissance, you had this Hermetic Reformation that was already taking place, and again, kind of providing a precursor or a proto-scientific, natural philosophical point of view. And it also, Mirandola's 900 Theses predates the Protestant Reformation, and actually, in a lot of ways, prefigures a lot of the things that Martin Luther brought up in his 95 Theses. So this stuff really goes way back in the relatively even relatively recent history, pre Copernicus, pre Jesuits, pre Scientific Revolution, pre Francis Bacon. It goes all the way back to Mirandola and the creation of the Christian Kabbalistic tradition through Del Mendigo, who in a lot of mainline history scholarship is labeled as an Averroist, which is Ibn Rushdi in the Arab world, and that's sort of a designation that portends that particular figure, Mendigo, to be an atheist. But if you look at Mendigo's own work, he specifically says that he was a disciple of Maimonides. So there you have this kind of bridging from the Abrahamic traditions into the flowering European Renaissance during the 15th century. But that's sort of a scholar. Go ahead.
Christians are so hell-bent about converting Jews to believe in Jesus that there's always been Messianic Jews that have been influencing doctrine in Christianity. Since its inception, it was founded by all practicing Jews and Pharisee Saul. So that's always been the case. There's been Messianic Jews in the 1500s that were creating doctrine and influencing Christians to want the return and the rebirth of the state of Israel. Like, you often hear, it's Christianity was always good and always opposed them until Vatican II with the Catholic Church, or until Schofield and Darby reference Bibles and the modern Zionist movement. But the Zionism in Christianity is inherent in it. It has always been built in. And if the texts are so easily interpreted in a way that creates these greatest allies, literal Noahide-esque slaves, or Esau, where Christianity is serving the younger, the elder is serving the younger, as the Jacob and Esau prophecy. But they've always been so eager to let them convert or force them to convert that it's always been open to their manipulation, and it's a Trojan horse all along to be used. And along with all of history, the influence you're talking about, Christian Kabbalists, it's the same story.
Well, yeah, you can even go all the way back to Charlemagne, sort of insulating the practice of usury as something that was specifically ordained as kind of like a religious allowance for Jews.
Right.
And so that kind of gives you a little hint that, like, wait a second, how much of this salvific messianic tradition is is ultimately an offshoot of a pre-existing Yahwist culture. I mean, I think that the more you look at the roots of how the figure of Yahweh began to emerge in history, you see.
You guys nailed it. You nailed it earlier about where it comes from. Canaanites,
Yeah.
Previous religions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you could even trace even the myth of Demeter back to Dumuzi and Inanna, which is ancient Babylon, and that during the Babylonian exile, there was so much interblending between the ancient Hebrew tribal traditions and the so-called Mosaic laws in with this sort of mystical Babylonian paganism that had the idea of a dying and rising God some 1700 years before the birth of Christ. And this is epitomized in the myth of Dumuzi and Inanna. And then that influence actually did become prominent in the hieratic rites, and then many of the Orphic schools, and then eventually the Ophites, predating Christianity. And it's fascinating. I think that there's some people who like to dismiss this line of inquiry about tracing the history of these various deities, including Yahweh, as basically a cul-de-sac or something. Like it doesn't help convince people not to believe in what they deem to be the superordinate creator being of reality. And there's a certain kind of point there. It's more of like a pragmatist point, that just by excavating the history in the progression of this deity doesn't mean that people are going to necessarily stop believing in it. And however, I would contend that the more you research and the more you find these influences way ahead of time, the more you kind of see our modern sense of morality and religion as actually being a kind of anthological ripoff, you might say, of these older traditions. And really, that you could include Christianity in that. That it's a sort of a mystery school derived syncretic sort of ripoff of the ancient mystery schools, the hieratic rites, ancient Greek theurgist figures like Iamblichus, and even going back even further than that. But if we're looking at the sort of pertinent progression from, say, the so-called date of the Babylonian exile up through the advent of the Christian dates, you see this very lively philosophical debate happening amongst all of these prominent figures, including the foundation of a lot of what we call to be atomism. Goes back to Democritus and Leucippus, and those guys were debating. Essentially, those ideas were influential. Xenophanes as well influenced a lot of the Platonic or the Socratic dialogues, and ultimately, you find that there were so many different renditions of miracle workers and sages, and many cults with way more followers than the Christians, going all the way up into the 3rd century AD, and so many of those traditions were essentially wiped from the historical record to a great extent. Their works destroyed, their their adherents persecuted, even within the geography of the old world at that time, all those peoples there. So, and then that was like that foreshadowed a lot of the European pagan persecution under the Christians from the 4th century all the way through to the 13th century, ultimately. And you see this sort of, you referenced this before as a kind of anti-competition type pursuit, where they were looking to quash any competing or contradictory or critical belief structures that sought to expose the underpinnings of this particularly aggressively exponentiating hegemonic power, which was Christianity at the time. And if you just look at the progression of influence all the way up to Julian the Apostate, there was even the idea that Jews needed a homeland back then. I mean, we're talking like 400 AD. This is 1600 plus years ago. So the theological subversion is pretty easily identifiable, I think, the more you look into the historicity of these and the mythological progression of these various traditions. So I think the mythicist position is very strong. I don't always buy the idea that, again, simply by showing them to be myths, that it actually is going to reverse many of the patterns of belief in the institutions that we see as problematic today. I think it's a start, but I think that there are other more sort of pressing methods to disclose how influential and how all-encompassing these traditions and this method of subversion really is. And again, I like the Puro standard of skepticism and epistemology about arriving at a place where you're content in knowing that you're not going to know the full reality behind anything. And I see a lot of this kind of hubris amongst religious people where they think that they have really all the answers because of their belief system. And it's like, it just smacks of like lack of critical investigation to me. And I was wondering what you thought about the kind of solutions to this particular problem might be, and then we'll get into all these clips.
Well, I completely agree. They in Judaism and then Christianity, they incorporated, elements from Egypt, Babylon, Sumeria, Canaanite. I mean, the Jesus story, dying and rising, passion, pagan gods, demigods as well. Scholars even believe the Odyssey was implemented. All types of different sources were created of them borrowing different things. And I think that the mythicist way will wake up a lot of people. If you can convince them that these are made up mythical Hebrew fables and that the patriarchs weren't real and that Noah's Ark isn't real, Adam and Eve isn't real, then it's not so much of a stretch to say also Jesus wasn't real. And when you see the Jesus story and how they basically quote mine the Old Testament and other sources for prophecies, or even just completely out of context verses in the Psalms and Daniel, Zechariah, Isaiah, Wisdom of Solomon, and all these other places, you can see that their trick is fake prophecy fulfillment, or creating prophecies as like a form of like almost Kabbalah wizardry sorcery to like manifest them into existence, because the Christians are fulfilling the prophecies by being Christians, and then they're all working together to recreate the state of Israel, and then they're all going to recreate the end times, Armageddon, Gog and Magog, birth pangs of the Moshiach, chaos and disaster and destruction before Jesus can float down from a cloud and save everybody. So I do think that just, explaining it like that will have an effect on waking up people that aren't completely dogmatic and brainwashed and under the spell.
Well, and that's the big caveat there. And I think a lot of what we've done is kind of showcase just how dogmatically blind and brainwashed so many people in the mainstream really are. And that open-mindedness that you reference, I think, really is the key to for people to wake up. However, there's such a huge behemoth system that's in place that seeks to repudiate any attempt of doing so as just like the label conspiracy theorist. There are these catch-all phrases that are used to completely delegitimize whole lines of inquiry and investigation.
Well, there have been generations of fear-based pattern behavioral programming. So even if you wipe away the foundational context of those fear-based pattern behaviors, you still have that ingrained almost in the DNA of the people.
And that shows up in the form of like very staunch cognitive dissonance of you're just saying that because you haven't had an experience, or you haven't had a personal relationship with these salvific figures, these deities. And so therefore your entire argument is dismissed because it doesn't speak to me on a personal, anecdotal sort of level. And you have that kind of cognitive sort of normalcy bias that's, I would say, sown by the establishment on purpose to prevent these kind of anacalyptic disclosures about the nature of these beliefs. Or you might
ironically say revelations.
Right. And that's the thing, is that there's a dialectic between apocalypticism, which is writ large everywhere you look today, and the highly suppressed but essential path of anacalypsis, which is basically showing the reality as it has always already been the case, as opposed to, here are our guesses, and here are our prophecies, and here are our convictions, and lo and behold, they're all coming true in apocalyptic fashion. I think that apocalypticism is dovetailed in with the technological supremacy and the desire for a supreme technotronic era, because under such a premise, you could eventually create technologies that could monitor people's thoughts and censor their very thinking. And so that's really the danger I see, is that through all these different avenues of control and cosmological subversion and
how about
religiously tinged science.
How about those bioweapons developed by the Pentagon to isolate the portion of the brain responsible for religious extremism? Yeah, that'll go well.
Well, yeah, there is an example there of that they want basically control over people's thoughts, so that they can implement this sort of moral supremacy. So that you see this constant appeal. Even in I have a quote here right quick before we get into this, to show you this kind of attitude. Now, this is Rabbi De Sola Pool, and he said at the meeting of the American Eugenics Society, I tried to indicate that the most noteworthy emphasis of Talmudic ethics was its setting up breeding for character as the paramount eugenic consideration. I recall that other peoples have more or less consciously bred for the physical qualities of the warrior, marriage within the caste, the samurai, the modern popular conception of a good marriage as marriage for money, the eugenic optimum as indicated by who's who, etc. But so far as I know, the eugenic emphasis placed by the Old Testament, including Amos, and by the Talmud on moral character as the eugenic aim is wholly unique. Perhaps in a complete and scientific history.
I'm the talk of the town. I know you're feeling it now.
Oh, sorry. There was a audio blip there. Perhaps in a complete and scientific history of eugenics, Moses, Amos, and the rabbis of the Talmud will be recognized as intuitive and extraordinarily influential eugenicists, even before the days of Galton and Carl Pearson. So there you go. Like, there's a unity there in science and religious supremacy around the idea that, oh, well, you know, the West would be morally bankrupt if it weren't for our higher spiritual nobility, moral character. And that is being used literally as a justification for eugenics laws. You still there?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Awesome. So that was one example that I wanted to use where a rabbi is specifically inciting eugenics principles as the fundamental basis for which Jews can consider their traditions morally superior to anything that's come before and anything that's going to come after, for that matter. So you see that that aspect in there as well, and you know we'll get into a couple of articles, but let's go ahead and play some of these clips right quick. This one in particular, I think you've seen this one.
You want to start with the Michio Kaku one?
Sure, yeah, that one's
okay.
That one's really short, and you can even up the playback speed to maybe 1.5 so we can kind of get through some of this stuff a little faster. Yeah.
When I first made the correlations between Kabbalah and science, I was stunned.
We do know that Isaac Newton had access to certain mystical texts, certain texts of the Kabbalah.
Well, the Kabbalistic description of creation is coming from a single little point, from a speck, and of having matter form and time and space form all together at the very beginning. This sounds very much to me like the description of the Big Bang.
I couldn't believe that the Kabbalists could derive these truths without really knowing any mathematics or physics.
It is certainly true that in string theory, the number 10 is the dimension of spacetime for supersymmetrical string theories, and 26 for bosonic string theories stand out as a requirement of the mathematics.
All the things that could destroy string theory, all the things that do destroy every rival theory to string theory, they are all eliminated in precisely 10 and 26 dimensions. These dimensions are magic. We physicists don't know where these dimensions come from.
The Zohar says those things. It could have been a lucky guess. I don't know.
The Zohar speaks of impure fats and pure fats, and that relates very well to modern medicine's view of the two types of cholesterol.
Now you tell me, how come that's the only text of 2,000 years old can have that kind of information so clearly there?
They knew things about the universe that took us till now to discover.
I think it's rather intriguing that the Zohar mentions cholesterol and mentions the liver and bile.
What I like about Kabbalah is that it has a rather profound view of a creator, of a divine being that transcends all possible notions that we could have.
There can be an interface between science and spirituality.
The Zohar's notion that light is a realm of no time and no space is quite consistent with special relativity.
What's been stopping it so far are, number one, the lack of a good concept, and I think the Kabbalah is offering that now in the context of modern science, and two, a reticence on the part of both scientists and people in religion to mix the two.
It's rather amazing, this uncanny reflection of some of the most advanced cosmology coming from our satellites, coming from our atom smashers, coming from our blackboards, that are mirrored in the Zohar and ancient Kabbalistic texts.
Thoughts on that, Adam?
That's the video that I was basically referencing earlier. I have that up on my channel, and isn't it creepy? It's like all of these different, mainstream media, TV scientists are all sharing the same talking point, almost like this is like a script in a way, because the Zohar does not predict anything special. There's no magic or, there's no metaphysical secrets or deep knowledge or anything like that. And in fact, what it actually is a story about the shattering of the vessels. Kabbalah and Lurianic Kabbalah from Isaac Luria, one of the top rabbis in their history of Judaism, says that basically the Gentile world, the Esau darkness, impure world is the Kelly pot, the shards of the shattered vessels that couldn't contain the divine light from God, and the shattered sparks of divine light which basically means the Jewish people, the Jewish souls, is concealed by the evil dark husks, the Kelipa, and that they need to remove and cut off and totally annihilate the Kelipa, which they liken to Gentiles, to Esau, to Christianity, to Amalek, anybody that opposes them. That's what's in Kabbalah. It's actually very supremacist and genocidal manifesto, essentially, that is just based upon and predicated on Talmud and Torah text.
Yeah, and what's really alarming to me is that these guys like Michio Kaku and others like him who subscribe to this, they are who you have to kind of trust when it comes to certain scientific subjects as far as how things are. You know, for example, a lot of these the largest observatory is owned by the Vatican, for example. So, you know, their employees, their representatives, they must have more truth than I could ever derive, you know, with any equipment that I might get. You know, that's the implication. Likewise, when it comes to space related subject matter, oftentimes you follow the money. It leads up into these, you know, super secretive enclaves of really alarming ideologues. You know, look at the founding of NASA, right, and the occultists involved with that. And, you know, I'm supposed to believe that they landed a man on the moon and that they're telling us everything that is available as far as knowledge goes about where we live and what we live on. You know, it's the same kind of mystery. They leave us with so much mystery. And coming from a Catholic background, we used to say that for questions that you couldn't really get a good answer for, well, that's the mystery of our faith. You know, so when you ask certain questions about, say, space travel to NASA, they say, well, we don't really know, or we think we know, but you could never know. And it's just like, kind of like, you have to kind of accept that, oh, this is the mystery of our faith. Oh, so it's faith-based, right? We have to trust and believe these high priests of science.
I mean, if they could deceive the whole world with a fake religion, worshiping somebody that didn't exist, right, and that was openly intended, meant to rule over them and conquer them and subjugate them and reign over them, and then, you know, and then seeing the way everything is so controlled and all the lies, I could definitely see these occult people pulling off some lies. Yeah. But as far as like the Vatican and, you know, their telescope, like, I mean, what do you think that the Vatican's lying about with their telescope?
Well, I think the whole conception of the Earth, you know, us being a spinning ball in this infinite vacuum of space, and that, you know, we can blast people off into far distant planets. All of that is kind of...
But we haven't done that.
Well, right.
We haven't sent anybody to planets.
No, but they claim that it's possible. Oh, you know, rovers to Mars, as an example, as a precursor to that idea. You know,
you
NASA
could see Mars with a backyard telescope. Like, if you can see it, they could shoot something out up there. You don't think so?
Well, that's an interesting point. So the telescopes that most people can access, including the so-called telescopic imagery, uses a magnification technique that artificially refracts away the light and sort of sphericizes or renders the lights that are being gazed upon as looking more solid than they actually are. You can compare this phenomena between like 100x telescope versus like a 1000x plus digital zoom, and though that there's a very different phenomena that is being intermediated there through the machine itself, or through the instrument itself. And so that is another basis for a lot of this cosmological subversion. Is if you go back to the philosophies of Democritus, you know, you see the creation of atomism as the notion that everything is reducible to atom or void, right? And that was heavily repudiated, or repudiated by Socrates, of course, and Plato didn't like that either. So there's always been sort of an ongoing debate as to the epistemological.
People have known about these planets going back, since long before Judaism. And the ancients we can see most planets with the naked eye, like Aquarian TV says. And we can see the moon, how it's a circle in a sphere. We can see the eclipses. We can see that no matter what eclipse, when the sun is shining on the earth, you can see that it's a curve from every different angle. So,
well,
what do you think explains that?
Well, okay, so that particular description, the ancients did. They were able to they had sophisticated ways of calculating the movements of the heavens, but they did not in those calculations surmise that the surface area upon which the phenomena were being observed was based upon a curved orientation. So in other words, we've seen this manipulation of our reality principle happen incrementally, to where we're basically kind of being gaslit into denying our own experience, and instead imbibing or accepting these sort of mystical authoritarian proclamations about the lights in the heavens. And it actually goes back to Hipparchus, who was the founder of trigonometry, and he had many important discoveries. However, when it came to the topic of the luminaries, or the lights in the sky, he presumed, again, no real investigation into this, because it really can't be experientially proved, that he said, for all intents and purposes, the lights in the heavens are infinitely far away. And this is a foundational presumption that did indeed influence a lot of the subsequent attempts to declare the earth or the lights in the heavens to be spheres. And that's actually a mystery school invention as well. The Samothracian Kabiri, the initiates in that order saw themselves as demigods, and they used an initiation ritual that sought to characterize all of the lights in the sky as other spheres that were dominated by higher demigods. And so the point of the mystery ritual was to make them believe that they themselves, through their initiation, were becoming demigods over the goddess Gaia. And so Gaia was essentially turned into one of these orbs, which is really the realm upon which we experience reality, and that in itself became an egregore or a thought form that was continually referenced over and over again as the basis for phenomenological observation. And so I see it as an example of again, a sort of mystical authoritarianism, where we can't actually verify or forensically measure any of these gazings upon that which we don't have any real dominion over, that which is that is informing things.
Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
I asked, just a few years ago, I was able to go outside and look at the moon and see that the curve of the earth, the shadow with the sun shining on the earth, was a curve. And it looked like a big sphere. And that's how it happens every single time, no matter where they're lined up, showing that it's not a disc that's a circle, it's a sphere that's a circle.
Well,
so my eyes aren't lying to me when I use the little thing to protect your eyes and look up at it.
Adam, I would say the same thing. My eyes don't lie to me, and there's a video I posted on our official Telegram where it was like 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and I'm looking at the sun in the sky, and I can also see the moon juxtaposed with the sun. So if they're juxtaposed with one another, how could the Earth possibly be casting a shadow? So we have to consider the a possibility that the moon phases as we see them. The shadow is one potential explanation, but what if the moon itself is casting its own light and has its own phase that isn't necessarily governed by a shadow?
I can look up at the moon during the daytime or at night, and you can see the side that's being lit, and you can still see the outline of the back half, the dark side that's not lit. You can see the whole thing. They don't have just half of the light on.
I know, that's what I'm saying, though, is if this
mechanism would be able to plant a sun or plant a moon that high in the air and fuel it and sustain it. Like, I'm kind of confused here, because it's usually Bible believers that are promoting the flat Earth and
unfortunately
firmament type of dome ideas.
Unfortunately, so
it's a conspiracy hiding the Creator God and convincing us, like a huge conspiracy that the Earth, like you say that we're not on a planet flying through space. How do you explain asteroids that crash in that we can see, or comets that they've measured have hit before?
Well, where's the remains
space
of
dust crashing into us?
Well, again, I think that we're sort of getting a little bit sidetracked on the broader discussion, but
I'm having Owen Benjamin on tomorrow, who is into this stuff. So I expected this tomorrow, but I didn't think it was going to turn that way today. But I guess, I don't know, I'll consider practice for the big bear.
Well, sure. I mean,
I've never really gotten deep into flat Earth.
Okay. So that's
the Judeo threat.
That's an important admission. I'm basically offering up the very real.
I haven't studied it. I've studied it some, but I just don't usually, spend my time talking about it.
Sure, and our offering really here is to demonstrate that in much the same way that you've discovered a lot of these theological subversions over people's imagination as to what God is or what the Creator is, that there is very much so a scientific and epistemological form of subversion that seeks to implant, again at a very early age, the power of suggestion through almost hypnotic relay, that this is the only explanation for real world phenomena, including the lights in the skies that we perceive. So the thing that's interesting about the moon is you could designate it as a diodic plasma that actually has a phase that we simply, in our frame of reference for time, don't see the rapidity with which it's actually occurring. We're beings that, traditionally speaking, can only have a predominant sense through the eye, and so there is an argument to be had that if you superimpose a framework that guides your perceptions about reality, then your perceptions are going to necessarily conform to that frame of reference. And so that's being had in the sciences when it comes to astrophysics, when it comes to the biological sciences, when it comes to many of the things that we deem to be hard science, are very much informed by these same kind of power suggestion, hypnotic trance illusions and appeals to authoritarianism.
You're saying that everybody's under a hypnotic trance when we look at the moon?
No, I'm saying that the frame of reference that we're applying to that perception is a subverted frame of reference.
This reminds me of like Greek Orthodox Christian pill pull a little bit, to be honest. I feel like the fact that so many millions and hundreds of millions in America believe that the Jews are chosen by God and that they believe that they're saved from hell because of a blood magic ritual, I feel like is much more of a substantial thing that we can focus on and prove. And that's honestly, I think the flat Earth stuff is just nothing but a distraction that discredits. I almost, and I'm not saying you guys are like, you know, promoting this as agents or anything. I think a lot of people sincerely believe this, but in my mind, it's just kind of seems like a distraction. I'll just leave it there.
Well, the problem with that is that it can't have been a distraction because this has been an ongoing debate for a really, really long time. It really goes back to days before Socrates, and again, the Hipparchus assumption that the lights in the sky are essentially infinitely far away, and there's no way to prove that presumption. Yet it's been unchecked, and it's been allowed to build a mass misconception about the very reality in which we live. So I think really the argument I'm trying to bring forth is that there are so many mass misconceptions that there really isn't a whole lot of safe territory when it comes to the extent to which we've been given a kind of false cosmology or a false understanding of things, and that is, of course, pertains to the theological question, but I think it also pertains to much more on the ground sort of physical phenomena as well. And I just to answer the assertion that it's sort of Greek Orthodox pill pull. I don't know. I don't think that's a terribly fair characterization because I'm very critical of the various schizophrenia and the schisms that are part and parcel to religious histories, especially within Abrahamism and all the different schisms that are involved there. So, from a philosophical point of view, I think it is important to suspend one's disbelief in the assertion that perhaps there are more mass misconceptions that operate in a perhaps subconscious or unconscious fashion due to inculcation from an early age where we uncritically accept things that this very much could be this very much could pertain to the sciences themselves. And that's kind of why I wanted to bring up the influence of Kabbalah on science, because it shows that many of the premises of science can be philosophically hijacked, and that many of the so-called discoveries can have deceptive frames of reference.
I definitely agree to that.
Yeah. And so, that's all I'm basically indicating is that the more you go down this,
but hold on, real quick. What they were like connecting very theoretical things to Kabbalah, like I can look up. I saw Halley's Comet, right, or Hale-Bopp. I could see that with a telescope. So like, I know I can see all the stars in the sky, and I don't think that's my lying eyes. I think those are very distant, reacting stars like the sun that we have. I mean, what do you think? How do you explain it all? I mean, isn't that amazing and a miracle and crazy enough as it is? Like, why is it? You said, oh, it's like you think they're lying about how far away the other planets are. Like, why what do they gain by this lie? Who is behind
this is a very good question.
This whole thing.
Okay, it's gained. There's an incentive to convince people of their lack of significance through evolutionary accident. There's an incentive to hide resources or discoverable lands that would allow for more population. There's an incentive to essentially create a new authoritarian class of scientific interpreters that operates like a priest class over the understanding of subjects that they actually don't have any real forensic knowledge about either, but they're LARPing as though they do. And so it creates a huge economic boondoggle as well to provide money laundering troughs towards these pseudoscientific aims and that acts as a form of economic subversion on top of a cosmological subversion. So I think there's plenty of incentives.
So I wanted to ask you, talk about like more land or extra resources. You think that there's just like other realms, other places like over the ice wall?
Well, okay, so the Antarctic Treaty, for example, is the longest standing, uninterrupted, uncontested, zero issues have been made about that agreement.
We can disagree on a lot, but we can all agree you can't explore beyond Antarctica.
Right. And that there is a gate-kept, highly, very well-funded attempt to essentially gatekeep any further exploration on the so-called continent, which I believe, if you look at the Hammond's air map, which was the actual air map used in World War II, that directed all of these fighter planes all over the place and these bombers, that they were not using any kind of spherical coordinate basis for those flights. They were using the Euclidean flat stationary map to guide all these expeditions. And if you look at Admiral Richard Byrd, all of those military forays into the Antarctic, much of it is shrouded in mystery.
I've heard this stuff before. So your answer basically is you do think there's something beyond the ice wall. Other land that there's.
Well, let me make it a little simpler. Forget about the shape of the Earth for a moment.
Right.
Try to buy a drone that can fly 10 miles. You can find them. You can buy them. But like the government actually governs who can fly and who can't. They literally draw an airspace through the FAA, and if your drone is in that airspace, it'll turn off. And the same is true for commercial flights. So they do have this top-down technocratic control, and why wouldn't they censor? Forget about Antarctica for a minute.
Right.
They're probably censoring land that we do know about and could potentially explore, because they have some sort of national security interest, or UN World Heritage Site.
Right.
Who knows what they've sequestered? I mean, censorship is not relegated to the internet. It's history, it's cartographic.
Right.
There could be other reasons that they don't allow drones or planes or people going down to the Arctic, but there could be plenty of other explanations besides that there's a whole other realms and other lands where the Earth is actually flat. I mean, because like I said, you can see the eclipses on the moon, the curve of the Earth.
Well, yeah, but the Mayans were able to predict eclipses long before there was any so-called forensic calendared measurement. I mean, in other words, a lot of the stuff that we use as data to verify the heliocentric worldview was already in existence with cultures and cosmologies that had no such purview about these particular phenomena. So it's easy to actually calculate eclipse cycles. You don't need those. You don't need the phenomena to accord to an enlarged atomistic projection of the universe. I mean, that's essentially what astrophysics is it's an enlargement and a superimposed projection of atomistic presumptions and axioms. And in the same way that we look under the microscope, right, there's another intermediation of our perception to the phenomena in question. So there's a lot of room for distortion and deception within that realm too. The whole really macro-micro bifurcation is one of the kind of schizophrenic epistemological problems that we face going forward. And it's replicated in ideas pertaining to subject and object. It portends to the notion of soul and mind and body. All these different schisms, I think, go back to a fundamental separatistic belief in the composition of the human being within the world. And I think that the world in which we reside is much more complex and nuanced than we would like to allege with the current scientific models that we're using today. So that being said, I think that looking at some of these clips that I forwarded to you might at least open more inquiry into this subject as to how gerrymandered and easily manipulated so-called scientific understandings and frames of references around reality actually are. So, do you have this actually clip right here?
Yep, it's queued up.
All right, yeah, go ahead and play this. So, because this answers your question about, yeah, astrophysics, it is very theoretical, but the ability to subvert so-called hard sciences is kind of laid bare in a couple different clips here that I've got queued up.
Science is Wissenschaft. And you heard its Yiddish cognate, Wissenschaft, earlier today in Tony Michaels' lecture. But Wissenschaft, or science, has always had a more expansive meaning in German, and in the German context, than the Anglo-American conception of science. German science is not restricted to the study of nature or humanity's interaction with the natural world. In German, science can also refer to philosophy, for example, including metaphysics and epistemology, so studies of what is reality, and also how do we know that reality. That's epistemology, the study of the philosophical study of knowledge. Science also encompasses the field of knowledge that we call the humanities, and usually kind of pit as the pair or the opposite of science versus the humanities. So in the German context, Wissenschaft encompasses both, or can encompass both. So let's say a little bit more specifically then, if that's true, does this term in German have any meaning, Wissenschaft, or what I'll often be just calling German science instead of using this German term. So when you go to the German context, the term Wissenschaft, there are basically two ways in which you can use this. You can talk about Wissenschaft, or science with a capital S, in an abstract way. And then what you would be talking about is a set of practices and also ideals or values for acquiring rigorous knowledge. Obviously you might say, oh, what makes something rigorous? That depends on intellectual communities who define that. In this time, the 1800s, they had a conception of what rigor meant, but it was also one that they were debating, they were thinking about it. So that's one sense. Some kind of, and you can see that this doesn't have to be only studies of the natural world. This could be, you could be studying anthropology and still say, have some kind of conception of some kind of set of practices and ideals that give you in that field rigorous knowledge, what you would define as rigorous knowledge. So that's Wissenschaft in one sense. The other sense of it is in a more particular kind of definition, where you're really talking about a specific field of study. So in the English usage, actually, there is such a term as, or such a phrase as, he made a science of hair cutting. So you're using that term science really to mean, some kind of expertise. So the second German sense of Wissenschaft is a little bit closer to that. And what you're talking about there is the specific practices used to study one defined subject area. So for example, I'll throw another big German compound word at you, Altertumswissenschaft. Anyone know what that means? Altertumswissenschaft. Yeah, some of you are nodding your heads. No? Okay, so Altertum means antiquity. Altertumswissenschaft is the study, or is the science of classical antiquity. So what we're talking here about is basically what we call classics, right? But in German, that's a science. So so when you're talking about science in that sense, Wissenschaft in that sense, you're talking about, in a specific scholarly subfield, you have all these methods, all these standards that you use to evaluate evidence. And so science, so Wissenschaft can also refer to that kind of particular instance, a particular branch of learning where you talk about it as being involved in producing rigorous knowledge. In Germany, science as a concept experienced a boom in the early 1800s when it acquired new importance and prestige. The rise of science was closely connected to the founding of new universities in the German lands at this time. And these universities were the forerunners of the modern research university, in which faculty members were tasked with conducting advanced research and also teaching undergraduates and graduate students. Basically the model of institutions such as the University of Wisconsin today. Research universities became the major sites for scientific inquiry over the next century and remain so. They really accelerated the process of what we would call scientific specialization and professionalization. Specialization, I mean that there are all these different branches of science, of study, different fields that people are going in, and they're hyper-specializing. They're focusing on what may seem like really small areas. My field, modern European Jewish history. To me, actually, that's huge. It's like, whoa, who can actually study all of modern European Jewish history in one lifetime? There's so much already to do, because we live in this age of specialization where scholars are producing so much material, so many discoveries, that you really always have to pick a small kind of corner of the field that you specialize in, that you work on, and that you can truly master. So that's one thing that's going on through universities. And the other one, so that's specialization. The other one is professionalization. So what that means is, and to you that might seem obvious today, but it wasn't at the time when it was first happening, is that if you want to be a scientist or a scholar, a real scholar, not just a dilettante, like a person who does this as a hobby, you have to be at a university. You're going to be a professor, a teacher at a university, which is paying you to teach students and also expecting you to do research, to do advanced research, and that research will then inform your teaching also. So, and in order to be able to do that, you need to get a PhD. So you need to become a professional, a licensed kind of professional, who's approved by a community of peers. So these two things are taking place in Germany really in the 1800s and are accelerating then.
That's the first clip.
That's the first
talking
clip.
about pretty much the licensing guilds,
right? The licensing
through the universities and the PhD,
and the gate kept nature of
the sciences.
The sciences. So this shows that there's been there's been an agenda to essentially hijack the so-called prestigious label of science and its seemingly innocent pursuit of truth, or its transparent pursuit of truth, into compartmentalized, easily manipulated factions of protected credentialist understanding of things. And you see this in the New Testament scholarship as well. Like you can't question the underlying so-called truth that the document is derived upon.
And Adam, I just responding to some feedback in the live chat that maybe we're sidetracking the conversation. We thought that not that we wanted to make it strictly about the shape of the Earth. I'm not asking you to disbelieve your eyes. I'm actually asking you to maybe think differently about what you see and consider that we do have to believe a lot of what the astrophysicists say, passed down from on high, in a similar way as we're supposed to believe the rabbis or the priests or whatever. But yeah, comments on that clip and what Xavier said there.
It reminds me of the academic gatekeepers in theology.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
There's a guy I follow on Twitter. His name is Joel Baden, and I've seen him on these YouTube atheist shows, and he's the professor of like Hebrew studies, PhD in the Torah, and it says on his bio on his Twitter, like, teaching the Torah and defending the Jewish people. And I'm thinking, can you be an honest interpreter of the Bible and theology at Yale when your agenda is to defend the Jewish people? And I think not.
A bit of a rhetorical question.
You're going to get a watered down version, and the academic gatekeepers, many of them are holding up the historical Jesus lie. Even they even gatekeep that issue with guys like Bart Ehrman, in my opinion, and others. And they lie. History is written by the victors and the propagandists, and definitely science, like we see with COVID, science can be bought and controlled and gatekept.
One of the best things you've ever said, Adam. You said recently.
On certain things, I think we can agree that that some things really are the way they say they are. Not everything is a lie.
Well, I'm not saying that everything is a lie, but really more that there are mass misconceptions that are bandied about as indisputable or irrefutable declarations of truth or fact. And I think there is an important distinction to be made there, that people can labor under mass misconceptions thinking that they are doing the very best and most honest thing that they can possibly do to believe in the truth. And that's a little bit different than a malicious or sort of a intentional lie. So maybe it's a type of lie because there's deceit built into the belief structure that it's true, but it's not a lie in the sense that people don't fully know the implication of what they're believing or the foundations of their convictions. So I think that there's there's three different categories of belief. Basically, there's unreasonable belief, right? That frogs cause warts or something that can be disproven. There's blind belief, where maybe you're believing in the right thing, but you don't know why you really believe it. You've just sort of been told about it. And then there's dogmatic or doctrinal belief, which is you have a pre-existing framework that instructs your ability to parse data, and you never ultimately question the dogma or the doctrine itself. It's just being used as a lens through which phenomena is viewed. So applying that to the sciences, there was a long-standing belief for hundreds of years that there was a special compound called phlogiston that allowed things to burn, that all objects had phlogiston built into it. And it was later discovered that no, it's actually oxygen. It's gas that's being released out of specific objects that are flammable. There isn't a underlying universal substrate within all things called phlogiston. So what I'm trying to indicate here is that there are standards and things that epistemological ruptures that happen within the sciences that basically lay bare many of the false beliefs or mass misconceptions that were had prior to the epistemological break or the better explanation. So I think that there's a lot of better explanations out there than the sort of chaotic, inchoate, atomistic schizophrenia models that we're led to believe in the sciences today.
Well, speaking of the sciences, and like we can all observe like so-called sacred geometry, right? The different shapes and patterns that are found in nature, right? We can see them like in the shape of bubbles that naturally occur, right? They're spheres. It's a sacred kind of balanced number. So why is it so hard to believe? We can look up and see the sun, it's a sphere. We can see the moon, it's a sphere. We can see the Earth's shadow, it's a sphere. Why is it so hard to believe that the sphere is just a natural shape, in the cosmos?
Well, it's one thing to cite, liquid surface tension with air within it supporting the form. It's another thing to assert that the sphere is a natural entity that can be projected or described onto various things. And there is a difference between a circle and a sphere. So,
and an oblate spheroid.
And an oblate spheroid, for that matter, which is, Neil deGrasse Tyson. The issue is that even, mainline heliocentric frames of reference say that we only see one side of the moon ever, which is
more of a circle than a sphere.
It's really more of a circle than a sphere. But even if we were to admit that there's some sort of sphericity, we don't know the composition of this thing. Any attempt to sort of derive a material composition is again based on authoritarian hearsay. That you have to believe that.
No, you can on a clear night you can clearly see all the craters on the moon.
But
so
you don't know that those are craters, though. You don't know that they're craters.
Well, I see asteroids burning up in our atmosphere, and I've seen that, experienced that with my own eyes. So I can imagine if we're getting hit by space dust, it's probably getting hit by space dust.
Well, but
is that not logical?
But Adam, did you have the asteroid fall in your backyard, or did you just see a light phenomenon in the sky and presume it's an asteroid, as the astrophysics community tells us?
I visited craters. I visited craters from asteroids that people saw burning up in the sky and land. And yes, I've seen many meteor showers. You can see them burn up and evaporate and go out. Like, what do you guys think?
So, but you never see meteors traveling up from the horizon vertically towards Polaris, for example. It all comes down towards the horizon. So if we're really in an acentric universe, you ought to have meteors that are coming up from the horizon as well and going out of distance into the top of our view. So I think that
I've seen them coming in all types of crazy angles.
Well, yeah, but you never see it terminate into the apex of your view of the sky.
Okay, well, so what do you guys think is a better explanation? If you're going to say my natural explanation is true, like what do you think these things are burning up in the sky?
Well,
what do you think the sun really is? What do you think the moon really is?
I think the most honest thing to say is that we don't actually know, and to think that we do because some people in the astrophysics community say that we do, I can't get on board with that. You know, one thing we can do is look at the people who actually make claims. Okay, so I didn't claim that the Earth was a disk or that there was a dome. Some might superimpose those beliefs because I'm maybe questioning some things in common with other people who believe that. But one thing that they do claim is like the actual circumference of the Earth, like it's roughly 26,000 miles. They have a figure on that. You can actually measure with equipment you could buy from bhphoto.com, you know, you can disprove that calculation by, number one, shooting a laser of sufficient power a certain distance and find out that it doesn't terminate where they say the curve would be based on that $26,000 mile calculation. So what's going on there? Maybe it is a sphere, but they're lying about the true size of it.
That's one possibility. However, there's also motion, and the 6 different motions that are supposedly taking place at variable speeds that are truly mind-boggling, in order to uphold this idea that we're actually revolving around a light source that is immensely huge at an immensely elongated distance, when there's actually no real physical evidence to prove that the light that we see as the sun is bigger than the plane of observation by which we take measurement. So that's also another presumption, as well as the Hipparchus axiom that the lights in the sky besides the sun and the moon are supposedly infinitely far away. So in other words, the argument really is that there are unchecked presumptions and assumptions at the very bedrock of the epistemology that undergirds much of physics, and you know that goes into the whole desire to have a mystical, authoritarian reunification of the sciences and religion, because there are so many of these premises in the sciences that have to merely be upheld based on the credentialed experts or inherited teachings and discoveries that have been disseminated over time. So I want to get to this other clip of she's an extremely popular YouTuber, has over 1 million subscribers, and in this particular clip,
which one is it?
If you go a little farther down, it's this one, yeah, her. This is a quicker clip. Mayim Bialik, you know, she's a scientist, but she also upholds this identity of Judaism, and I think that it's important to see this particular argument that she puts forward as really a fundamental basis for what is called the New Age movement that's referenced a lot, and including with your recent stream with Donnie Darkend. And so I think actually a lot of the New Age has always already been influenced by Kabbalistic egregores and thought formations. So this is an example of a attempt to reunify science and religion under this identitarian Judeo ethos. Go ahead and play this one.
As many of you know, I'm a scientist. I'm also a person who's part of an organized system of religion. In particular, I'm Jewish, and I believe in the tenets of Judaism, and I actually get a lot out of religious observance. You might be wondering, how can you be a scientist and also be a religious person? Scientists are only supposed to believe in observable, quantifiable things that they can physically have proof of. Isn't being religious fundamentally in opposition to everything that being a scientist is about? These are good questions. I'm a thoughtful person, I'm a skeptical person, and I am not a person who believes blindly in anything. So how is it that I believe in God, and what does that belief look like? Well, maybe it's easier to start with what I don't believe God is. I don't believe God is an old man with a beard in the sky guy who grants you magic fairy wishes if you recite the right words or feel guilty enough. I don't believe that God can grant you a parking space if you pray hard enough. And I don't believe that God has set up some code of behavior, and if I don't live by it, I won't be granted my place in heaven among the angels. So if the God I believe in isn't all of those things, who is God? Well, the God I believe in is the force in the universe that drives all of the phenomena that we experience as human beings. God is gravity, and God is centrifugal force, and God is the answer to why everything is the way it is in the natural world. You might be thinking, well, that's not God, that's just science. I guess you're right, but in my cultural and religious tradition that goes back thousands of years, we have a tremendous sense of gratitude and humility for our place in the natural and scientific world. Understanding equations that describe gravity and pressure and force and torque is science, and that's amazing. But having a spiritual connection with that information, so much so that it brings you to your knees because it is so unbelievable, is what it means to have a relationship with God. I also ascribe our ability to think, to reason, to love, to build, to create as divine, because it's amazing that we exist. Like, do you ever get that feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we exist? I get that feeling all the time. A closeness with a notion of God gives me the opportunity to experience myself as a spiritual being and not just a physical or a mental one. But having a relationship with God gives me a chance to understand my inner world in a way that can't be measured by inches or SAT scores or HDL, LDL ratios or by diplomas hung on the wall commemorating learned information. It can be measured by the way it feels when you read a poem or a psalm and you feel like someone out there understands you and there is a purpose to continuing your existence. It can be measured by the way it feels when your stomach flip-flops over and drops to the ground when you stare into the eyes of someone that you want to spend the rest of your life with. It can be measured by the enormity of emotions you feel when you look at the Milky Way or when your baby smiles at you for the first time. It can be measured by the depths of despair that you feel when someone breaks your heart. And it can also be measured by the hope you feel when you know that you will love again. So what do I get from religion? Well, my religious practice gives me discipline. It's normal and healthy for human beings to have boundaries, and I guess to what extent you want them is kind of up to you. For me, my religious tradition helps me to think hard about decisions I make. I only eat certain foods, I make it a priority not to gossip, to learn to be more compassionate, to find ways to repair the world, to meditate, to seek justice and pursue it. All of these things are guided by the structure of my religious faith. And I'm inspired by the notion of a responsibility to a universe that is governed by something bigger than me. It's okay for smart people to believe in religion, and we aren't always happy with how religion looks or how religious people act. But there's a force in the universe that underlies all of this beautiful chaos. And understanding the relationship between science and God, I think, makes me a better scientist and a more complete person. So I'm sticking to that. Subscribe to my channel. See you next time.
That's a pretty full-throated articulation of the merger of these various subversive strains of thinking that we've been talking about.
Yeah, that was just straight rationalization pill pull for her to not abandon the absurdities of the Torah, like, and to try to make it sound sophisticated and have all this value and stuff. Like, that's absurd. Like, does she believe that Moses really got the commandments from God on Mount Sinai? Does she believe that the wife of Lot turned back and got turned into a pillar of salt? Does she believe any of these things are actually real, or they're all myths and she's just reading into it whatever she wants to fit her own beliefs and her own agenda, or is she interpreting it in a way that she can rationalize, you know, the way she lives her life? That's what it seemed like to me. That's an interesting clip to see sort of a secular scientist. And it's funny because this girl's Big Bang Theory, she was almost the next Jeopardy host. They really seem to like to promote her a lot as the brainy Jewish girl, basically.
Right, but I think there's also a rationalization in there that science is essentially an incomplete worldview without the underpinning of the moral authority of this religious identity. And so you see that in the creation of things like bioethics. And we can, if you look at bioethics boards, you can see who really dominates those boards. And this attitude undergirds the need to mystify science in a religious light, while simultaneously rendering the religious identity something that's of scientific merit. So I think that's
a good point too. Yeah. She is doing the Gaona Vilna of blending the science and the Judaism, which Kabbalah is like the inner secrets of Judaism. So she is definitely trying
and
to
string theory apparently
make them seem like they're coherent. Yeah, string theory they try to say is Kabbalistic also.
And I wanted to dovetail this clip in with another one that's a little farther up. This guy right here. So this is, you know, Harvard University top cream of the crop articulation of this idea of mystical panentheism, which is a I call it a kind of transcendental inclusion of both science and religion into what is ultimately an articulation for and really an expansion upon that last clip of a new age or a new world religious sensibility. Let's go ahead and play this one.
Before you start it,
Oh wait, hold on.
Let me pause it.
What's that?
I just wanted to add, the Gaiona Vilna also instructed all his Kabbalist initiates to be a master in I think it was one of the 7 sciences. And that's why he was called the genius, is because he was supposedly a master in all these different fields.
A polymath, right.
And I'm now working, by the way, I'm just completing the Hebrew translation of it. I'm working with the translator, but I've really rewritten the book totally for an Israeli audience, and it will be coming out next year. So yours is out in English, mine will be out in Hebrew. We'll be able to talk to each other. At the beginning of the first chapter, I want to read a couple of passages together, and then I'll talk about it. I open with a theological assertion. As a religious person, I believe that the evolution of species is the greatest sacred drama of all time. It is a tale, perhaps even the tale, in which the divine waits to be discovered. It dwarfs all the other narratives, memories, and images that so preoccupy the minds of religious traditions, including our own. There is a bigger story, infinitely bigger than all of our individual stories, and one we all share. How did we get here, we humans, and where are we going? For more than a century and a half, educated Westerners have understood that this is the tale of evolution. But we religious folk, the great tale-tellers of our respective traditions, have been guarded and cool toward this story, and have hesitated to make it our own. The time has come to embrace it and to uncover its sacred dimensions. I insist on the centrality of creation, but I do so from the position of one who is not quite a theist, as understood in the classical Western sense. I do not affirm a being or a mind that exists separately from the universe and acts upon it intelligently and willfully. This puts me quite far from contemporary creationists, or from what's usually understood as intelligent design. My theological position, in fact, is that of what I call a mystical panentheist. A panentheist, one who understands that God is throughout all of being, that all of being contains the divine self, but panentheism is distinct from pantheism, meaning that there is something mysterious in the totality of being that goes beyond individual beings. The oneness of being somehow becomes a transcendent oneness. Just one more passage. We would thus understand the entire course of evolution, from the simplest life forms millions of years ago to the great complexity of the human brain, still now only barely understood, and proceeding onward into the unknown future, to be a meaningful process. There is a one that is ever revealing itself to us within and beyond the great diversity of life. That one is being itself, the constant in the endlessly changing evolutionary parade. Viewed from our end of the process, viewed from the human end, the search that leads to the discovery of that one is the human quest for meaning. We seek meaning in the evolution of life. We seek meaning in this process of development. But turned around, seen from the perspective of the constantly evolving life energy, evolution can be seen as an ongoing process of revelation or self-manifestation. We discover, it reveals. It reveals, we discover. As the human mind advances from our point of view, understanding more of the structure, process, and history of the ever-evolving one, we are being given, from its point of view, ever greater insight into who we are and how we got here. This ongoing self-disclosure of the one is the result of a deep and mysterious inner drive. The force of being, directed from within, however imperfectly and stumblingly, to manifest itself ever more fully in more diverse, complex, and interesting ways. This has caused it to bring about, in the long and slow course of its evolution, the emergence of a mind that can reflect upon that process, articulate it, and strive toward a life of awareness that can fulfill its purpose. Well, if you read this, you will see that the words one and being are usually capitalized in those paragraphs. Which is to say, that's the one that I understand God to be. I don't like the English word God very much. In Hebrew, I use the proper name of God, Yud He Vav He, the four-letter name of God, the Tetragrammaton, which of course is an impossible conflation of the verb to be. Yud He Vav He is Haya Hoveh Yeh. It's that which was and is and will be, all put together in a form that doesn't quite make sense. You should better translate it was, is, will be than God. That's a little awkward to say though. But that's the sense that it has. And that means that I understand being itself. As the divine, or the divine as the totality of being, the mysterious totality of being that somehow remains one. It is the one that was before whatever we call the Big Bang, the origin of this universe we're in, and it is the one that is maintained through and present in every fragment of rock that flew off, and every gas that blew, and every chemical element that made up the origins of life. That one was there in all of its manifestations. It is present in all, and it is that which unites them all. And it is the one that undergoes the process of evolution. It is there throughout the process. If it's there throughout the process, it must somehow allow that process to happen to it. It must somehow take take on the forms. The Kabbalists, Jewish mystics, will speak about the process of creation really as a process of emanation. It's the flow of the one into the multiple forms of being that we're really talking about. The terms that we'll use are hitlabshut and hitpashtut, the one garbing itself in the infinite number of garments, the infinite number of forms that creation takes on. Everything is a hitlabshut, everything is a garbing of the one. I think all those garment metaphors worked so well because most of the Jews were tailors, as my family were, and so somehow the metaphor of garment, everything is a garment, was somehow very familiar to us, but it's also the hitpashtut, the flowing presence, the flow of the one into multiplicity. Remember, of course, that for mystics, the question of the one and the many is a very central question. Mystics are always confronted with, if there is only one, and that's the teaching the mystics insist upon, there is only one. Not there is only one God, but there is only one. There is no one and, there is only one. If there is only one, why does the universe I experience seem to be multifarious? Why are you, and I, me, and this separate from me, and floor and ceiling are separate? Why is there multiplicity if there is only one? And in some ways, you may say much of mystical doctrine throughout the world is an attempt to answer that question. The Kabbalists have their series of answers to it. Their series of answers to it have to do with a graduation of the process. The mysterious one, the Ein Sof, the endless, that which can't be named at all, begins to manifest itself through a oneness that becomes 10. Through a oneness, if you use Arabic numerals, you could say to the one you only add a 0, and nothing changes when you add a 0, but yes, everything changes because the one becomes 10. Sometimes the Kabbalists talk about what they call sot ik, sot aleph, yud, kof, kuf, which means to say the one manifests itself as 10, the 10 manifests itself as 100, the 100 manifests itself as 1,000, and in fact there's nothing there, there's no number there but the one. In fact, the one is constant through all the ongoing multiplicity. So I have come to understand the evolutionary process in that kind of mystical notion of creation as emanation. The one flows into the multiplicity of being. Now,
all right. So there you have the all-encompassing combination of essentially mass misconceptions coming together in a highfalutin academic and intellectual that is espousing a New Age synthesis of science and religion and really philosophy. But again, it operates under the deference to the sacred drama of evolution and the sacred narrative of the universe, and all the gases that blew and the rocks that formed are really just articulations of the one true God. So this is an extremely widespread belief, and I would say it really dominates a lot of the secular Jewish frames of reference and points of view. And I think that is something that needs to be contended with. Yeah.
And what would the alternative to this be? Would it be Adam and Eve and what it says in Genesis? It's like, I see this as them trying to make their theology compatible with like the modern understanding of philosophy and science, to try to give credit to the ancient authors of their text, to try to make it seem like they predicted this reality or something like that. Or is it the other way? It also could be both ways, that science is being influenced by people trying to inject these Kabbalistic ideas into how we explain, and
respectfully, the
about,
latter,
existence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it's a combination of both, because him comparing the story of the shattered vessels with the Ein Sof emanating his light into the 10 vessels, and then them shattering because they couldn't contain the light, and then it be the scattered light. I mean, this is all just made up nonsense. This isn't really what
it also
is.
tips its hat to evolutionary biology.
Say it again?
I think it also tips its hat to evolutionary biology, which Adar, in your interview, referenced a bunch of times about not just the evolution of, organic life, but the evolution of the texts. It's kind of like how they treat the Constitution. It's
an evolving document.
It's ever changing.
Right. Exactly.
And even if you look at the history of the idea of evolution, this really goes back to the peripatetic school and Aristotle. Aristotle had a pretty sophisticated teaching on the microevolution of species that I think still holds pretty well today. It's this Darwinian, really Lamarckian concept of macroevolution that I take more issue with, because if you look at Darwin, he really recycled a lot of his Freemasonic fathers, Erasmus Darwin's ideas about evolution. So these are pre-existing ideas that are being reformulated, recodified, and reprojected into the debate as supposedly settled science. And I think that this is a giant philosophical error and mass misconception that has really subverted a lot of the imagination of intellectuals in the West in particular. And it deserves much more review. And just like I cited earlier, that the one of the founding articulators of the Renaissance philosophy, which you couldn't have the Enlightenment or the Reformation or any the scientific revolution without the Hermetic Reformation within the Renaissance. And you see with Pico de Mirandola, he was heavily influenced by a Maimonidean Kabbalist, and those were before any so-called modern scientific musings. Even if you look at Francis Bacon, this guy was the founder of the Fellowship of the Royal Society, which gatekeeps almost all scientific discoveries, along with the Smithsonian Institute. And Francis Bacon himself was an occultic alchemist. He wrote the New Atlantis, in which he proposes in a technological utopic society something called Solomon's House, which basically dictates reality to people according to their superior knowledge. So that you have within the scientific movement, as far back as Francis Bacon, Kabbalistic subversion. And so I think that this is a realm of study that is completely neglected and completely overlooked by a lot of the academy, just in the same way that a lot of the mythicists in the modern academy are just derided and dismissed as, hermeneutic of suspicion peddlers and, kooks.
Yeah, they call mythicism a conspiracy theory, these academic types.
That's right.
And any idea of Christianity being a deception and Christianity being a controlled opposition, religions, Judaism for the Gentiles, they completely write off as absurd without even looking into it. And I don't disagree with you at all about the cabal control of science and the high levels of society throughout history. But with these issues, though, it's like, okay, so now you're saying that you don't believe in evolution either. Like, what is I see the alternative as like the creation story in the Bible. I see that as the Jewish version of explaining how we're here in creation, which I find absurd, that God would just poof, Adam and Eve into existence and all the animals. Also, all the animals that we can see that have gone extinct also, like, you're saying that both options are not credible and kind of Jewish in nature. So what do you think? How do you explain life on Earth if not evolution?
Okay.
Or creationism?
Well,
or are you a creationist?
No, I'm not. I'm not a creationist in any sort of biblical sense of the word. I'm much more of a sort of a Neoplatonist when it comes to like the Enneads and the writing down of the Enneads through Plotinus's disciple Porphyry and his rejection. Porphyry actually had an incredibly well-defined repudiation of the entire Christian theology and a lot of the false scientific musings that were coming out even during his time, using Christian metaphysics as a basis for cementing this kind of I would call it the pseudoscientific charlatanry matrix worldview. But of course, a lot of his work was destroyed summarily, censored, by the very people he was criticizing. So you have a strain of thinking through Heraclitus, Parmenides, Plotinus, and Porphyry as an extremely powerful metaphysics that has nothing to do with ancient blood ritual sacrifices and has nothing to do with this, and that goes back into the ancient world. And I think that there is a possibility to create an alternative based within this again historically suppressed and stigmatized worldview.
Well, that's interesting because the Kabbalists and the Gnostics adopted basically their idea of Ein Sof and the Adam Kadmon from the monad and the even the Greeks with like the logos and like the I learned this stuff from Bjerknes's books. There's the character. What is the guy's name now? It's almost like Dionysus, the first man. The idea of the logos character. That in Adam Kadmon and Kabbalah, like they're very similar. Actually,
that's in the Ophite tradition, Phanes or Protogynous.
Right,
yes,
Phanes, Protogynous. Right.
Yes, and that is absolutely a good example that butts right up against the eventual formation of the Jesus myth. And
they basically believe that there's like a divine form of all things that exist on earth. There's a divine form like in heaven, basically, right? And I would disagree. I think that evolution has lots of mistakes, and it looks like design, but it's actually not. It could be designed in a better way if there was a creator, and that evolution better explains, biological life forms.
Well, I mean, I would just point to the development of that concept in and of itself. That it does go back to axiomatic presumptions about the nature of species as a whole, and how there is a multiplicity of being and a diversification of living creatures. And I don't portend to have any of the answers. I'm really more just showing that there's a lot more assumption in the sciences.
Well, there's also a lot of belief too.
There's a lot of belief
because we ultimately have to believe these people who are considered to be qualified experts, PhDs, university types. Those are the only ones who get any kind of funding for a lot of the things that would say give us knowledge about our archaeological history, and there's been a lot of chicanery. Just look at the dinosaur bone trade,
the bone wars,
the bone wars, the Smithsonian suppression of real archaeological finds that might give us more insight into your question.
Guys think you question if dinosaurs are real?
I think that there is a possibility of certain large extinct, entities. However, if you look at all of the supposed dinosaur models, there's less than 10% bone fragmentation for every single proposed dinosaur that ever existed. So we have a Marvel Comics.
Never found near complete skeletons.
Never.
Of dinosaurs.
Never.
I've seen them.
Well,
where?
I've seen them like even smaller ones or mid-sized ones like stuck.
Well, in the 50s,
you can see them etched in. I forget what they're called. Not even what?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Adam, in the 50s.
I mean, why we see lizards, we see birds. Why is it so hard to believe that there was other ones around on Earth?
It's not hard to believe that, although
the forensics
it is kind of interesting, right? They had so many more million years to evolve than we do under the mainstream accepted timeline of our chronology here on Earth, but yet we're the most advanced in the shortest time frame, and they didn't seem to evolve much at all. And I would also point to, there is a lot of imagination that goes into
that because mammals had a better brain than the reptilian brain. There was other added parts to it.
Yeah, but if you look at like the final form of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, it doesn't make any evolutionary sense the way it's constructed with its
maybe
proportion.
mammals, because of the bigger brain in mammals, that gave them a better chance of having a smarter evolution tree.
That's one theory. I guess what I'm pointing to is, you know, there should be a healthy level of cynicism and criticism
And
of
skepticism.
these and skepticism of these established scientific figures, given the, you know, the nefarious special interest that I think Xavier's trying to highlight here, but also just from the bone record, right? There's a lot of falsification in the bone industry.
A lot of forgeries.
And in the 50s, there were people could buy these kits, you know, where they would get a bag of bones and you would create your own dinosaur skeleton. And it was ultimately just chicken bones that they were sending around. So, you know, ultimately we have to believe
People
in.
do all types of cons. I agree with that.
Yes, yes. And that's really more what I'm pointing to. I'm not trying to definitively denounce any sort of field of science, but rather invite people to realize that there is so much mass misconception, subversion, and charlatanry and scamology that goes back built into it. That goes back as a tradition much farther than any of the so-called objective musings of the sciences. And that dovetails in with another one of these clips, that guy right there, who...
Are you guys Eric Dubé fans?
We've never had him on. We would definitely like to talk with him. He has some interesting points of view on this particular topic. He's very confident, of course, in his assertions.
Desire to...
He's very confident in his assertions, and I think that he's missing some things here and there, but I think that he does present a powerful repudiation of the credentialism and manufacture of consent around a lot of these scientific fields. So that being said, I accept his contributions in this field as a sort of a leading resurgence of debates that were going on 150, 160 years ago, and never were entirely settled, for that matter. They just kind of got suppressed and eclipsed during the entire wake of World War I, and then the economic crash and the Depression, and then World War II, creation of Israel. All that stuff is had received much more attention and primacy post Einstein, and a lot of the critics of Einstein were never really answered. And you know about the extent to which Einstein plagiarized the vast majority of his thought experiments. He ripped them off from Henry Poincaré. His wife and friend wrote the vast majority of his so-called peer-reviewed studies and findings. Einstein wasn't even a very good mathematician. He never invented anything. I mean, so this goes to show that there's scamology built into the so-called gods of science that are upheld by the academy, that are upheld by the mainstream secular people. So it's just important to question some of these idolized figures in the history of science.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I like the questioning, but I've also seen a lot of the questioning, and I just, on some things, I think that it's more likely that it's not a conspiracy behind some of these things. That's just my honest opinion, and I can't change the way that I think, just like nobody can. You guys can't. And I find it fascinating to discuss and to hear, the thought process on these things.
Well, I definitely commend you for hearing it out without, throwing, dismissive labels around like, oh, well, that's just, flat earth pill, or that's just, this, that, or the other dismissive label, just in the same way that...
Well, I just said that's what it sounds like. I asked about asteroids, and then, the answer was very kind of like, not a direct... It's just kind of what happens in the debates with the philosophical-esque Christians. They kind of answer things the same way.
Well, because we don't actually really... we have a... I would say a false standard that's upheld as the default understanding of something, and then we have people who try to poke holes in that understanding, and then the reply is always, oh, well, if you're trying to poke holes in this and you don't have a satisfactory explanation that unseats the pre-existing manufactured narrative around what the standard is in the first place, then it's not to be taken seriously. And I think that's actually a courtier's reply, which is an informal fallacy that says, oh, well, because I'm not qualified to talk on this particular subject, or that there's smarter people than me that have concluded along this line, therefore any skepticism or criticism towards that standard or that view, or any attempt to maybe open up a implicit ambiguity in that particular standard, oh, well, that's just dilettantism, or oh, that's just, you know, casuistry or pill pull, or that can be dismissed. So, but that's kind of a.
No, I wasn't saying your work was pill pull. I'm saying just that answer sounded to me like, you know, like you didn't have a good answer to the question about the, which I thought was a pretty straightforward question about the shadow of the Earth being seen on the moon, and that it curves from any angle like a sphere.
Well, what I'm trying to indicate is that frame of reference in and of itself is assumption based. That we see the phases of the moon and the waning and the waxing as the shadow of the Earth, because we were inculcated with that belief from a very early age, again by these high priests of science. And the second that you bring up other possible explanations, like you know, how many hundreds of billions of dollars have been funneled into this so-called space war, the entire space race. Who knows what kind of objects are up there that could fail at a certain height and then crash down to the Earth and resemble something that is then labeled as an
ultimately
as an
a credentialed recovery team approved by the government has gone and collected whatever fell, and you know, then they get to tell us what it was.
It's still a declaration from on high that has no real open forum investigation into the topic at hand. It's very gate-kept information. So that's kind of what I was trying to refer to, is that, look, you know, this particular phenomena, there's questions to be had about it, independent of the conclusions that are arrived at by people who are heralded as experts. And I think you know where I'm coming from. I really just want to kind of open up the discussion around this particular avenue.
Infiltration of the sciences.
Infiltration, but also the pre-existing presumptions, axiomatic proclamations, and assumptions that really were never fully excavated, or were never really fully digested before they became heralded expert frames of reference. So that's kind of the argument. It's not that we have a better answer. It's that the existing answer leaves a lot to be desired, because it's based on foundational presumptions that are ultimately inscrutable. We have to believe this entire sacred drama of evolution unfolding from billions of years, from a heretofore unprecedented explosion that turned nothingness into beingness. I mean, you basically have to buy that premise that it's a mechanical, sort of accidental unfolding. And again, it's important to question it. And just going in,
I agree, and I definitely do question it, and that's why I'm not like a militant atheist by any means, and I actually consider myself agnostic, because yeah, I mean, it's obviously amazing. I just think it's a more amazing explanation than like the biblical explanation. You know, that Eve came from Adam's rib and from dust, and said, "Let there be light." Like, I just find that so unbelievable and unproven.
Well, right, but I mean, ultimately, that's kind of what the cosmic egg theory and Big Bang really is as well. It's all of a sudden there was nothingness, and then there was light, right? It came forth into the world, and the explosion sort of implies that there's a something that's expanding into something else, and that there's some kind of light that is thrust forth from that explosion. So I see that there's actually a unification that has always already been the case between this idea of radical emanationism, or the Ein Sof exploding into being, and God just deciding to create everything all at once and bestowing light onto things. I see them as actually very much tied at the hip, and that we don't really have the best explanation. We have belief-based or doctrinally assumed narratives and counter-narratives that have been manufactured over time, and that's the sort of problematic that I'm working with.
They very likely could be wrong about the Big Bang.
Right.
Doesn't the Catholic Church affirm the Big Bang?
Yes.
Nowadays also?
Yes.
I believe they do, yeah.
Through
it doesn't make sense to me that there would be nothing before a Big Bang. Like, I can understand maybe, infinite numbers of Big Bangs, or on the other side of every, there's theories that on the other side of every black hole could be another, what looks like a Big Bang in another universe. There could be fractal universes. There could be infinite dimensional universes. Like,
okay, so
I find wondering about that all of that is more likely in my mind than the God of the Bible said, let me just manifest this human being.
They seem very similar.
Nothing.
Yeah, they seem very similar to me.
No. One's trying to find the answer, and the other is saying, we know it happened, and whoever the hell wrote Genesis said, it happened in 6 days, and I'm confused now. Like, do you guys believe Genesis is real, or you're saying it's wrong? Because you're saying they're the same as the Big Bang.
What I'm saying is it's also another controlled dialectic.
How do you think existence happened?
Okay.
How do you think existence?
So if you can imagine the Big Bang, right? You could potentially imagine that we're actually on a much smaller scale than we claim to be, and we could be in a giant experimental vivarium, for example, where there are much greater, powerful entities. We're not necessarily going to call them gods, but they could be other biological entities on a scale that we can't truly fathom, and we're occupying a very specific node within the honeycomb, for example, and that ultimately we live in a hyper-stratified matrix, essentially.
Yeah, Adam, we've only drilled like 8 miles down. So how can we believe them when they say they know what the center
of... That's pretty far. That's a big drill.
But it's really, if the Earth is even what they say it is, 26,000 miles around, that's nothing. And we know they're vast, like unexplored cave structures. So it would be easy to sequester society. Just get in an airplane and see how much space there is that we're not occupying.
Right. And that the scale that we assume everything has been conforming to could also be in error as well. So I'm not saying that I think that there is a controlled dialectic here between, either you believe in the Hebraic creation myths or some other sort of inherently spiritual or religious explanation, or you have to believe this heavily gate-kept guild system, manufacture of consensus, scientific paradigm. And that, to me, is a controlled dialectic right there. That you have apocalypticism on the one hand, which all of these prophecies seek to edify and seek to manifest. And then on the other hand, you have a more anacalyptic notion, which is, oh, well, everything is unfolding and we're just trying to discover things, and this is the truly rational and reasonable frame of reference by which we can conclude, when in fact they both have unfounded mystical presumptions and assumptions built into them. So I'm trying to get beyond the controlled dialectic of scientific narratives and then also religious narratives, and seeing how they actually complement each other in reinforcing this kind of schizophrenic doublethink worldview that can allow someone like Mayim Bialik to expound on, how she's a better scientist because of her religious identity, and she's now also a more enlightened Jew because of her scientific frame of reference. So this is another controlled dialectic that I think needs to be completely torn asunder, and that's where really a lot of my emphasis in my work is.
Okay, well, here's I'm interested in this theory that, like, I guess the Earth is like a tiny dome, and do you believe that it's like actual biological giant creatures that have built this construct for us, like Truman Show or Hunger Games type of playing field, and that they're actually living beings?
Well, again, this is
that did this.
this is
and we're
inherent.
just like little ants in an ant farm, and they're testing us or something.
Well, I mean, again, this is speculative, but if I was to show you an example in nature, right? The sequoias, for example, are trees that dwarf 99.99999% of all trees in the world. You can also see dogs, for example. You have these teeny little, teacup poodles and chihuahuas, and you've got these massive Irish wolfhounds and Great Danes and everything. So what makes us believe that we have been the same size from time immemorial to today? I don't necessarily think that that's a safe assumption to make, scientifically speaking.
Okay, so you think it's people that were once super huge and created a construct for us?
That's one.
And they built it out of these are like material existing like you could see them if you somehow could see them or measure them in some way.
Well, I'm saying that,
and they're just hiding outside of the firmament.
Well, that's
and
not.
It still doesn't. Hold on, real quick, because this was the main point. I didn't get there.
Right.
If this is what you're suggesting, it doesn't even answer the question that I'm asking: is how do you explain life and existence? Because then you would ask, how do you explain their life and their existence? What created them? It's an infinite regression.
Well, sure, but that's all attempts to answer that question essentially end in an infinite regress. It's either a immutable being like a god that's always existed and just decided to separate itself into all of creation for its own edification, or it's a infinite regress towards a all-encompassing nothingness that randomly and inchoately turned into something. So unfortunately, this is a horizon of consciousness issue, which is what science is constantly butting up against, and it essentially hubristically wants to contain it and explain things. So I think that there's an epistemologically privileged position of the attempt to explain things in an all-encompassing kind of universal way that I don't think is necessarily the strongest foundation on which knowledge is built, for example. And that explanatory power and the desire for explanation drives people into mass misconceptions. And because we want to have a sense of certainty, we want to have a sense of that we've figured things out, that there's other people out there who know more than we do, and that we have to defer our intelligence to theirs in order to receive a kind of proxied enlightenment about these topics. So we have to let the experts sort of decide, and that's unfortunately a perpetual quandary that's haunted philosophy, science, and religion really from the get-go. And the point is, I don't know the answers. I'm just taking issue with the answers that have been provided. And I don't necessarily have to provide a counter explanation in order to elicit the fact that these pre-existing explanations have a lot of holes in them and leave a lot to be desired in terms of rigor. So that being said, I mean, even when you look at law and economics, right? These are framed as sciences. And the need to have a sort of indisputable, settled consensus about something has been labeled as scientific, when in reality, it's actually belief formation and it's belief preservation. So I wanted to play this one clip here, Jews and the Science of Race in America. And this is, I think, a very...
here we go.
Yeah.
This should be good.
Yeah.
An even more serious issue came with the topic of the government's desire to classify immigrants according to race. And this again shows the desire of the larger society to create a more hierarchical system in which they felt they could gain control over understanding their population and to make social policies which would be based on this new data. So that first appeared in the statistics kept by the U.S. Immigration Commission. In other words, I don't know if any of you have ever done genealogy, for example, and looked up your ancestors' ship's passenger list. But if you have, you might notice on there in a certain period, one of the things that they recorded about each immigrant was their race. And they used this kind of European system of racial designation. So it would, for say, a Jew from the Russian Empire, it would ask nationality, in which it would say Russian, but then it would say race, and it would say Hebrew. So they were keeping track of what they called race, as well as the country that the person came from. And the Jewish community grew worried about this because they felt that if the government was collecting this kind of statistics on them, it could only be used for negative purposes. And they became even more alarmed in 1909 when there was a suggestion that the Commerce Department, which was in charge of the census, was going to adopt the same racial designation. So previously in all censuses, they recorded people according to race, but using the more traditional American system of black and white and a few other designations based on color. But now the proposal was, well, look, we have all these people coming in from Europe. We have to have a more complex understanding of the population. So the census will now record people as Hebrew, et cetera, all the different European racial designations. The Jewish community came out in force, the American Jewish Committee, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, and they successfully lobbied not to have the Census Bureau adopt this kind of practice. There was also a brief concern that in some courts in the United States, Syrian immigrants were denied naturalization based on the understanding that they were not white, because in the naturalization law from 1790, it limited naturalization to free white people. And Jews became alarmed because they felt that if Syrian immigrants who were of Middle Eastern origin were being judged non-white in the courts, that it was only a matter of time before someone decided the Jews were of similar origin as Syrians, and Jews would have the same problem. So all of these things were mounting concerns in the early 20th century. So this brings me finally to science, which is our topic for today. Science was one of the arenas in which this battle was fought in a very important way. I want to, first of all, I just want to take a moment to just show you, for example, this is a cover of a joke book that was published in 1902 of Hebrew jokes. It just shows you just a little taste of some of the images of Jews that circulated in popular culture at the time, which show the Jew to be, different physically, different racially. And you can perceive in this particular image a tendency to draw features of the Jew that also are reminiscent of some stereotypes against African Americans, the way that his hair is, the lips. This is just part of why Jews were very aware during this period of the dangers of their changing racial image in American society. Okay, so back to science. Science was a very important arena, and before I tell you kind of the story about how this battle was fought in the scientific community, I want to say a few words just about studying Jews in the context of science. Science is kind of an important entryway into Jewish history. For one, the Jewish group produced a disproportionate number of scientists, and I can speak mainly about the United States, but of all the immigrant groups, Jews were the most upwardly mobile. Of the Southern and Eastern European immigrants, they were the ones who entered higher education the earliest, often because they came to this country as skilled workers with experience in living in urban areas, and they advanced on the social and economic ladder more quickly than a lot of other immigrants who had been laborers or agricultural workers in Europe. So at the time that these issues were being fought out in academia and the scientific community, Jews were one of the only immigrant groups that were already beginning to be represented in the academy. So there were some Jewish individuals who were well placed to contest some of the conclusions that were coming out of the scientific community regarding the racial difference of Jews and other immigrants. So that's kind of an important aspect in which the history of science is, Jews played an important role in that regard in contesting some of the conclusions of science and anthropology and social science and other areas. Another thing to mention is science was a particularly attractive avenue for Jews in this kind of defense work because of the authority of modern science. In other words, science was understood as a value-neutral, universal field of inquiry in which just facts existed, but opinion and bias didn't enter into the situation. This was the way science was understood. As I'll explain in a minute, that's not exactly the way it works. But because of that, first of all, that eased the entry of Jews into science. Jews sometimes had trouble in academia getting positions as literature professors, for example. Ludwig Lewison, the German Jewish writer, for example, if you've ever read his autobiography, he had an awful time getting a position teaching English literature because the assumption was, how can a Jew understand the culture and pathos of people of native-born and English background? But in science, background was thought to be less important because of the notion that science was a kind of universal, value-free field. And so many of the Jews who first got involved in academia, the scientific fields were often the first area. Matter of fact, the first Jewish professor in the United States in the 19th century was Professor Sylvester. I think it was John James Sylvester at the University of Virginia, and he was a mathematician. And if you look at the history of Jews in higher education, you'll find that they were often in the sciences, in mathematics. Sometimes languages was a vehicle also, especially the field of, as we'll see in a minute, of Semitic languages, because the Jews were thought to have a kind of natural understanding of that field. So anyway, science was a very important avenue for Jews looking to break into the intellectual community. And the other thing I want to say is that a starting point for understanding this whole discussion is to understand that despite its reputation, despite the idea that science was a kind of value-free, neutral sphere of inquiry, it was actually, of course, like all endeavors, situated historically and culturally. In other words, the people who conducted science were always shaped and informed by the concerns that they brought to their research, by the values of the larger culture in which they lived. So as much as scientists protested that it was just about the facts, the science of every period is necessarily biased in some way and situated within the assumptions of the larger culture in which it's produced. Sometimes people have been loath to look back and to study seriously what we call racial science, because they say, well, that was just pseudoscience. It wasn't real science, so it doesn't sort of merit serious consideration. But that keeps us from really confronting the fact that science in every period is shaped and reflects the values and assumptions of the period in which it was created. So we have to understand that in this day, in the late 19th and early 20th century, racial science was considered real science. The people who did this work felt that they were dealing in facts, and they were not willing to admit, and they were not aware of the fact the way in which their work was shaped by the larger set of assumptions of their society. And so it helps us also understand how science works in all settings and even today. So it's.
And that's the end of that clip.
When you first.
Very interesting. I like the clips. Very interesting clips that you selected to play for me today. The idea that your identity and your society and your assumptions influenced science at the time, and then he's saying lots of Jews got into science, is that this is why we see today all the anti-white narratives in academia, because it's being influenced partly from their perceived history, but also from their mythological stories in the Torah, like Amalek always wanting to annihilate them, or Esau hating Jacob, and then these things influence their beliefs, and they're taught that the Gentiles hate them, and then we see that in some of the sciences today. That's an argument I've been making for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the irony is, if there was a more rigorous attempt to classify and maybe enumerate the differences between Jewish immigrants and European immigrants, we may not have had such a stranglehold in terms of foreign lobbies over our laws. And that has also precipitated this, and again, the anti-Gentile sort of attitudes have filtered to the very top of academia in terms of deriding any so-called white nation as merely colonization and oppression through taking, and the culturelessness of European migrants,
almost like inherently evil, almost.
Right. And it's such a crazy projection, or an inversion narrative for that matter, because the reality is, who's subverting who at this point? Like, who's colonizing who at this point? And how are they able to essentially turn the tables on what was considered to be a highly sophisticated, hard science when it came to racial makeup? And I mean, today you see people advocating for like race realism, right? And you know, in a lot of ways that's to be lauded. However, because of the turning of the tables against so-called racial science, anyone who tries to bring up the importance of race is immediately labeled as being pseudoscientific. And so that's a fascinating development within the academy, in much the same way, interestingly enough, that eugenics is derided as being some sort of Nazi fixation or something. But in reality, eugenics, just like from that quote of the rabbi that I read, goes all the way back to Amos in the Old Testament. So, I mean, that to me is just like...
And the concept of being refined, the people being refined through the fire also. It has a eugenics tinge to it.
Yes,
through persecution, through the temptations of Satan or idol worship, i.e. Christianity.
Well, and it's also the idea of the melting pot, right? The idea that was put forward by Israel Zangwill, right? He was the one who wrote The Melting Pot, which is the most popular play on Broadway. And he wrote that America is God's crucible, the great melting pot, where all the races of Europe are melting and reforming. Here you stand, good folks, and your 50 groups with your 50 languages and histories and your 50 blood hatreds and rivalries. A thing for your feuds and vendettas. Germans and Frenchmen, Irishmen and Englishmen, Jews and Russians, in the crucible with you all. God is making the American. And 4 years later, he says the exact opposite thing for Jews. But if dissolution will bring degeneracy and emancipation, dissolution, the only issue from this dilemma is the creation of a Jewish state, or at least a Jewish land of refuge. And that was back in 1912.
Right.
So, I mean, that to me is like, is very informative. The quote by Trotsky here, let me pull this up here. Yes, this is right along that same line. Trotsky said, while the romantic numbskulls of the Third Reich are dreaming of restoring the old race of Europe's dark forest to its original purity, or rather its original filth, you Americans, after taking a firm grip on your economic machinery and your culture, will apply genuine scientific methods to the problem of eugenics. Within a century, out of your melting pot of races, there will come a new breed of men, the first worthy of the name of capital M, man. What do you think about that?
Interesting. I've never heard that one before.
It's amazing. I mean, the fact that America was over 100 and nearly 20 years ago seen as this great frontier for blending people together into a contentious, disputatious mob, so as could be technologically controlled by a new breed of man. This dovetails in with Kudinov-Kalergi and the whole pan-European.
I was just going to say that.
Definitely. Go ahead and expand on that.
Yeah, Kalergi, who was close with the Rothschilds, wrote in his book that the persecution of the European Jews would strengthen them and turn them into like leading, I forget the exact words of it, I probably could look it up. What did he call him again? Like the leader nation or something?
Trotsky? Or
no,
Kalergi.
He said all the Gentiles will
these...
be mixed into like an Egyptian-like mulatto, and that the Jews will be strengthened through the persecution and will be like the noble ruling class.
Yes, the spiritual nobility of Europe.
Spiritual nobility.
The spiritual nobility of Europe and the Eurasian Negroid, right? The idea that when we blend all of the Gentiles together, they will create a homogeneous culturalist entity that will be more easily subverted and steered through world history, much in the same way that Esau will take up the sword for Jacob, right? You see that being basically encouraged today, and the destruction of the seed of Amalek. What better way to destroy the seed of a people than to render infertile and sexually perverse the huge swaths of that particular target population? I mean, if you look at Magnus Hirschfeld, right, he had an institute for sexual science. So again, this obsession with needing to rationalize perverse teachings around human sexuality in a scientific way. That goes back over 100 years. Right around this.
I've seen rabbis. I've seen rabbis describe. I think it's a king, some king in the Old Testament, and in the Talmud it says that he mixed all the people, all the nations together, as a form, I think, to control them or subvert them. And then also, it's the idea of what they did to the Tower of Babel after, they made them all speak different languages, in the same place as a form of subversion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the same idea.
Definitely.
Yeah, they'll be the spiritual nobility through the persecution, refined through the fire by Esau's divine. They even have a story with Jacob and Esau where Jacob was going to go meet Esau, and he put away half of his people to go somewhere else, so that if Esau slaughtered all his men, they would still survive on. The branch would, even if a branch is cut off, the tree or the root, goes on. That's like
ends justify the means.
Right. It ends justify the means.
So they're willing to sacrifice their own, even in a way,
yes,
in a eugenic sort of way, to make them stronger. And this does work tribally. Think about it. If there's such an in-group tribal preference that anybody that goes away is ostracized, they fall out, and the people that stay in the culture, in the tribe, the holy seed that must be kept separate, right? It just becomes stronger and stronger tribalism.
Absolutely. And the thing is, what's so fascinating about that is that the double standard around genetic purity becoming a kind of moral blindside against the West, where they have to genuflect before the unique covenanted identity of the Old Testament progenitors. Even in the modern era when it comes to science. I wanted to play this one last clip. We're actually running up on almost 5 o'clock. Thank you so much for being with us on this show. This has been, I think, a pretty hard-hitting, awesome discussion, and very informative on a lot of different levels. The Richard Dawkins clip. I think this is just so emblematic of what I was talking about. Just this deference and this need to sort of self-censor, talking about disproportionate influence by this sort of identitarian body politic that encompasses Jewish identity. Go ahead and play this Richard Dawkins clip. I think this is really revealing.
Religious fanatics are apt to take the law into their own hands on occasion, aren't they? And actually threaten people, actually use physical violence.
But you choose to go onto Twitter. It's not a venue for scientific debate. You choose to go on Twitter. Just to take one example, a tweet in which you drew a very invidious comparison between the number of Nobel Prizes won by people from Trinity College, Cambridge, and the entire Muslim population of the world. Trinity College, Cambridge comes out on top of that comparison. Now, not disputing the factual basis of it, why make such an invidious comparison? Why raise that? Why raise the issue? What's the point of drawing attention to that?
It is a fact that in the Dark Ages and Middle Ages, the Islamic world was a beacon of scientific progress and enlightenment. And something has gone wrong. I had dinner with the then Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sacks, a few months ago, and learned there the astonishing fact that between 20 and 25% of all scientific Nobel Prizes have been won by Jews. And I thought that was a stunning fact. It really is. I mean, when you think the total population of Jews in the world is tiny compared to really any other of the major religions. So I wanted to make this point that Islam has stagnated in the scientific field since the Middle Ages, and the best comparison to make would have been with Jews. And then I thought, oh no, I can't do that, because that will really upset people because of Palestine, and I'm very sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinian people in Israel. So at the last minute, I crossed out Jews and stuck in Trinity College, Cambridge.
But I can...
Wow.
That's funny.
I think that is just like...
funny. You know,
go ahead.
I've listened to his book, and he talks about how his famous statement about God is like the most evil person, and, you know, all these attributes of why he's evil. And then he says it's the God of the Old Testament, and he was attacked and called that he was an anti-Semite because he was attacking the Jewish God, per se. And also, he acknowledges in his book that the power of the Jewish lobbies, even though they're small in number, that they have disproportionate influence in regards to politics and organizing. He says that in his book.
And within the sciences. I mean, that's 100x overrepresentation when it comes to the highest so-called scientific prize in the world. I mean, that ought to tell you something, that science is so heavily gatekept as to be the research from
owned. As to be owned.
As to be owned, essentially. I mean, 100x overrepresentation. I mean, are we really just supposed to deflate that as, oh, they've got better overall standard deviation IQs, like the whole Jordan Peterson baloney? Or are we gonna...
No. They're not chosen by God. They don't have the divine wisdom. There's natural reasons to explain that, and it's part of it is definitely some nepotism going on. Part of it is culture. Part of it is kind of the, you know, when you're taught that they hate you and they want to get you and you're a victim but you're chosen, it kind of gives you a chip on your shoulder that almost makes you somewhat of a culture of like overachievers, or there's a high standard. You know, there's plenty of reasons that can kind of explain this. But the disproportionate over, like, it can't explain. Even if they were a little bit smarter, which I don't think they are, there's still so many more Gentiles. There's so few of them that you wouldn't see this type of overwhelming influence.
Without it being highly gate-kept and subverted. And I think that that's... Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that I've presented a pretty good case to be skeptical of the... trajectory and the process of scientific achievement, discoveries, understandings from the angle of, look, we're swallowing kind of manufactured consensus patterns and thought form, power of suggestion, conclusions about things that are essentially based in Jewish cult of personalities. I mean, if you look at the emergence of the 19th century, you've got Marx and Freud, and then Einstein in the early 20th century. And those three guys, I mean, you want to talk about a small percentage of people, have essentially shaped the entire gestalt and attitude around scientific thinking for the last 160 years. So I I think that it's a huge open field of ongoing investigation and inquiry. I like a lot of CJB's insight into these things as well. I definitely have read his work as well. So, and he has actually some pretty good articles on many of the sort of history of science kind of excavations as well. And that's one of his really first big works, was this investigation into the fraudulent plagiarism of Einstein. And also, when you look at Freud, I mean, there's no real scientific rigor behind what this guy is doing and saying.
He was a fraud.
Yeah.
He was a phony and a cult-like leader, basically.
Absolutely.
And right, we definitely have every reason to question, the mainstream and the status quo. That's what science is about, is questioning the status quo. But also, it's like, I don't think that we have to agree on some things being real, like things that we could observe with our own experiences or our own logic. I don't trust any of these things that I believe in just because it's coming from Neil deGrasse Tyson on the History Channel or something like that. I don't consider them high priests that speak, the dogmatic truth by any means. But I also, I'm not an extremist in that way, but I also don't go, oh, well, that guy has a Jewish last name, so I assume that he's automatically lying or a part of a cabal or something. I judge each thing,
Right.
on its own merit and just with what my own mind sees of the evidence.
We know you do, Adam, and that's exactly why we wanted to have you on. And I thought Xavier did a good job, bringing some good source material that dovetails with your work. And so we really appreciate you spending the whole 3 hours basically with us.
Amazing.
There's a lot of good debate going on in the live chat. I know you're probably used to more views and concurrent views and that sort of thing, but hopefully we can continue to network. And I saw some people say this was probably a good prelude, a precursor to your discussion with Owen Benjamin, who's a character we have discussed as well on the show in several different contexts, some of which you
probably are like him, because he's questioning a lot of the same stuff too.
We think he frames a lot of these issues, unfortunately, in sort of a huckster, kind of flippant, stoned frat boy sort of way that sort of discredits the talking points, unfortunately, when there's actually a lot of depth to this neo-skeptical school of thought that I'm trying to advocate here.
Well, he's also a comedian too, so
Sure.
he's doing all this.
It's
while
part of the
also
shtick.
trying
We
to
totally
do
get
the
it,
thing.
and I respect the hustle for sure. Adam, again, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up the show here. Is there anything you'd like to say for the folks listening in as a goodbye?
Yeah, just check out nomorenews.org. I'm on BitChute, Odyssey, Twitter, Telegram, and go back and watch. I've got playlists. Go back and watch some of the presentations. I do interviews, presentations, news shows, all types of stuff. So if you're not familiar, please check it out, because usually I rely a lot more on the information and the clips, and don't ever really talk about these issues that we talked about today. But I did enjoy it.
Oh, good.
Absolutely.
Glad to hear that. Well, thanks again. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're going to play a song on the way out, and we'll catch you on the next stream.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Take care, guys.
You too.
Absolutely, you too. We'll be in touch, my good man.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Take care.